How's it going, everybody? And welcome back to your favorite swimbait podcast, Scales and Tails, episode 138 today. We're joined by a gentleman who I'm sure almost everybody has at least maybe heard of his bait before. But also, you guys are if you guys are watching this, you're watching it on YouTube. This is the first I've used Zoom a couple times for these, but this is the first like video one that will actually probably find its way on YouTube. So we are joined by Mr. Kevin Brightwell from KGB Swimbaits, who I'm sure you guys have probably at least heard of the Shad maybe once before if you're a major swim bait guy. But we've got a whole line of questions to ask Kevin tonight, kind of hear how KGB got to be, kind of all the baits he's made, how he's made it around to making all these baits, and even maybe that ABS bait you guys are familiar with and have been seeing all over the place. So I guess, Kevin, we the inaugural question for everybody is how did you get into swim bait fish, or how did you get into fishing in general? What was your first experience for fishing?
First experience of fishing was before I can remember. I grew up in Arkansas on a farm, kind of a working cattle farm, and with those you have farm ponds and you go fishing. So the first real standout memory for me for fishing, I remember going to the ponds and catching bluegills and all that stuff. But the first thing that stands out that I remember, and I don't know if I remember it or if it's just I've been told so many times that I remember it, is my dad. I do remember picking the bait. I remember this trip, I think, because of everything that transpired. But I remember picking the bait. It was a Rapala or Rapala. However, in the South, you call it Rapala.
Yeah.
But I think it's Rapala, actually.
No, dude, I call it
So,
Rapala too. I will say
yeah.
I call it Rapala.
Yep. And it was the just one of the, kind of a shad. It was the three hook, just shallow diver.
Mhm.
Um, really typical. And it was one of the wooden ones. We're talking, 30 years ago. Um, so I remember my dad, tying it on. And I said I want it to sink, and so he put a couple split shots in front of it and bombed it out. There we have this farm pond. It has an island, and he bombed it out. And for me, it seemed like he hit the island, which was incredible at that time. Like it was out in the very middle of the pond. It's a pretty good sized one too. And he cast it for me, and I make about 3 or 4 cranks, and we're ankle to shin deep in the water, and all of a sudden, boom, fish hits, and I'm fighting this fish and trying to reel it in. It's Zebco, 33, and uh, this fish comes up and head shakes and splashes and all that stuff, and I freak out. Apparently, I panic. I'm running in circles, screaming. The line's getting wrapped around the rod, like it's just a mess. And I guess I panic enough that I throw the rod to my dad, and he's like, "No." He forced me to. He handed it to me. He said, "No, you're reeling this fish in." And I was 5 years old. It was a 5 pound bass. It was the biggest bass that I'd ever caught. I was so proud of it. Took it to my grandma's house. Like that time, we're talking 30 years ago. And it's a farm pond. I kept the fish
Yeah.
and got it mounted. And it's still to this day, the taxidermist who did an incredible job. He's no longer with us, but he did an incredible job. And that fish is still hanging on my wall as just like a memory of like, that's how it all started.
Wow.
So it's kind of cool. 5 years old, 5 pound bass. I still have pictures of me holding the fish,
Uh-huh.
and then there's more pictures my parents have found of me holding the fish once we got it back from the taxidermist. And it's an old school skin mount, but
Yeah.
it's still in like pristine shape. It's got a few cracked fins from moving and stuff, but
Man,
that's
that
what
is
got me into fishing.
that's a
So
badass story. It's even
yeah,
crazy, that it is a skin mount and you still have it. Because I mean, my grandpa had a bunch of old skin mounts. My dad has a skin mount, and They
they
they're
don't
they're
last.
probably about the same age, and it's like, man, they're pretty beat up.
Yeah, this thing it is instilled like the taxidermist who did it. He lived just down the road from me, and he was really low key, but he was like a world renowned taxidermist,
Mhm.
and he eventually quit doing fish. Um, and I'll circle back to him later in the whole KGB thing because it's kind of cool how it all transpires and how it all like almost full circle and stuff. But um, long story short, he eventually taught me a lot about painting fish.
Oh yeah.
So it's just really cool how that all came about. Years after he quit doing fish, he decided he's only doing deer and stuff like that. Eventually, he just got down to where he was doing deer,
Hmm.
and even during that time, he ended up giving me my first paints to do fishing lures. Like he had a bunch of leftover paints that were 15, 20 years old. And he's like, shake them up real good, man. So he's like, they're old. He said, some of these are going to be dried up. And he gave me his paints, and those were some of those paints were on my first lures that I ever sold.
Dang, man.
So
So you kind of teasing us a little bit with the KGB
yeah.
stuff. So I guess the next question is, how did you get into swim bait fishing, or where was your start of swim bait fishing, your first experience with it?
So my first experience with swim bait fishing was actually Castaic Lake, Castaic Lagoon
Wow.
in California. That's Butch Brown's stomping grounds. I mean, that's where he, does all his videos and all that stuff. And I did not know what I was on at the time until it was almost too late. Like now I look back and I'm like, holy cow, like timing and everything was just ideal. Um, so my family moved out to California. I started high school out in California. From Arkansas to California, in Los Angeles, the heart of Los Angeles, quite the transplant from going from farm ponds to the heart of Los Angeles. Like, it was culture shock. So I really found myself at home on the water. I got more into fishing once I lived in California than I ever did here in Arkansas.
Okay.
Because I was still in high school. Like I still did farm pond fishing in Arkansas. Then once I got my driver's license and all that stuff, in high school, that's when I started going to the lakes, and that's a whole different thing. So I really got my feet wet and really dove into. I'd always been fishing, but really got into it in high school. That's where I found my happy place. That made me feel like I was home again, and home is Arkansas for me. So spent a lot of time, hitting the shores and all that stuff, and then. What's funny, another kind of circle thing is my dad, when we moved out to California, we had our landscaping trailer that we sold, and he sold it and bought us a bass boat. Bought me and my brother a bass boat. It was an 86 Skeeter, 15-foot Skeeter. And so that got me actually on the water instead of just beating the shoreline. And then what's ironic is when he decided to move back to Arkansas, he actually found that same exact trailer and bought it back.
Yeah.
So then we had the bass boat and the trailer. He sold that trailer in Los Angeles. It went to anybody. It exchanged hands like 3 or 4 times, and somehow we ended up with the same trailer and moved back to Arkansas.
Oh my gosh.
That's another kind of like, there's a lot of circles in the history behind KGB, but that boat, when he sold the trailer, he sold it for $4,000. We found the boat for $4,000. So it was just kind of almost a trade-off.
Yeah.
And he was happy to get that for us because it was for us kids, me and my brother, and we were going out hitting Castaic or, any of the lakes anywhere we could. And that really got me on the water. Doing that, I started working at Sport Chalet, which at the time was like one of the biggest sporting goods stores in California. They closed down a long time ago, but that was the equivalent of like, I'm trying to think of a store that compares. That was like a miniature Bass Pro Shops, but on steroids and more sports related. They had mountain biking, snowboarding, skiing. They had basketball. I mean, that was a sporting goods store for all sports. So I found myself working in the fishing department there for high school and really dove into drop shotting. That's what I really got familiar with out there. It was like robo worms. That was the thing. Super finesse stuff. And I was doing really good, catching lots of, 2 to 6 pound fish. And that was before I got into swim baits. That's just fishing. Like you go catch 2 to 6 pounders.
Yeah.
Every now and then you might stumble into an 8, 9, something like that. But, I was just happy to be fishing. Sport Chalet actually got some swim baits in. And it was some of the first mass-produced swim baits that was available for a sporting goods store like that. And it was actually Spro. It was the Spro BBZ baits. And so that kind of got me curious. It's like, what are we doing selling these big things? I was used to little tiny finesse stuff.
Yeah.
So that kind of got me curious on swim baits. And then there was a day I skipped school, was messing around all day. In the evening time, I got the itch to go fishing, but didn't have time to launch my boat. In California, well, a lot of places, a lot of people don't know is in California, a lot of those lakes, they have time limits. You can launch from sunrise until sunset, and then they lock the gates to the lake. You can't be in there. The police will actually run you out and write you tickets if you stay late. And that's just common practice. Like a lot of people who live in California don't know otherwise. They don't know what it's like to go launch like at 5 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. So out there, you had to be done at a certain time. Like, you can't launch. They wouldn't even let you launch your boat past like 5 p.m. They wouldn't let you do it. So you never really got that sunset bite
Yeah.
if you were a working guy. I don't know. I had an itch to go fishing. It was in the evening time, and it was around spring, and I still didn't fully understand bass at that time. I was just going fishing.
Yeah.
I knew finesse stuff. I really knew they're biting, but I didn't know about the spawn. I knew they spawned, but I didn't know much about it. It was during the springtime. That's about all I knew. So I'm from the shore. I run up to the lake real quick for a 30-minute shoreline session.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there on the shoreline, and I see a big bass, and I'm sitting there finesse fishing this bass, and she's not moving. I didn't realize she was on a bed, and never could trigger her to bite. Well, some dude, some jackhole rolls up right in front of me on a bass boat right before the lake's about to close,
Yeah.
and catches that fish right in front of me. I mean, 15 feet away. And like, dude, what the heck? I'm a fisherman too. Like, I have a boat. I would never do that to someone. And he laughed and laughed. He threw that bass back in the water. And he said, "Here, jump on my boat with me." And so, all right, whatever. I'm a high school kid. This is the equivalent of hitchhiking,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I jump on his boat, and he's like, "Here's what I caught it on." He showed me it was a Matt Lures bluegill.
Oh, yep.
And he's like, "Here, throw this back on that right where that fish is." And I'm like, "Nah, man, like, what? It's not gonna work." Threw it right back on it, and the fish hit instantly. Lost the fish, but that was about a 9-pound class fish, which at the time would have shattered my 5-pound
Yeah.
personal
Yeah.
best. So I was instantly like, "What the heck is this?" And this guy started talking swim baits to me like crazy. Like, I'd never, I'd seen them, didn't know what they were. Went like 6 or 8 months. We exchanged numbers and all that stuff, and it was kind of weird. He's an older guy. I was, high school guy, but we both liked fishing, and in California, that's a rarity. So, 6 months later, something goes by, and I'm messaging one of my friends that I hadn't messaged in a while, and I didn't. They had the same name, and I saved them in the contacts. It's the same name. And these are old school phones. I'm talking like this is the peanut shaped ones where you have to type like
Yeah.
hit
Like the
one button 3
Nokia,
times to get the right
ones.
letter. So inadvertently had messaged this guy, and he's like, "Hey man, it's been a long time. You want to go fishing again?" I'm like, "What? Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, let's go fishing." So we went fishing. His name was Dave, and Dave introduced me to swim baits. That's how I got into swim baits was just random by chance being on the shoreline
Yeah.
and some guy rolling up on me, some guy twice my age, and being kind enough to show me into swim baits. So Dave and I built a pretty good friendship based on fishing and hung out. Dave had a really strong personality. That's a lot of stuff you get in California, or I mean, yeah, I guess it can happen anywhere, but he just had a really strong personality. So we don't really talk much anymore. It was a little much for me, but I can give gratitude for what Dave taught me, and he taught me a lot about swim baits. Um, he was a wealth of knowledge. He had tons of information about swim baits. He had been fishing them for a long time. Was kind of underground before they really exploded and became popular. He had been fishing them at that point for about 6 or 8 years, and that's when Spro first rolled out. So, like in 2006, he'd already been fishing them for several years.
Yeah.
And so he was in the early 2000s or even the late 90s when he started fishing them.
Wow.
And so I got a really good jump start. And for Castaic, that wasn't the prime time. Like the prime time was early 2000s. But that was definitely, I hit it on the tail end of when it was possible to go out and catch multiple, double-digit fish in a day.
Yeah.
So,
Man.
sorry, drug that out, but that's how I got
you're
introduced into swim baits.
You're good, dude. So I guess when you got off his boat, when you got off this stranger's boat, did you go into work the next day? Did you buy any, like the BBZs or anything like that?
No, it was actually, it was after, accidentally texting him again that I finally went in and bought one. I bought a few BBZs and a few Huddlestons from the local tackle store that's just down the street from Castaic Lake.
Yeah.
And started dabbling into it that way. what really drives me even today is when I finally sat down and finally decided to get into swim baits. Like, this is what I'm going to focus on, swim baits. Everybody had told me, like, dude, sit down your other stuff. Cause I was just like 99% of other people getting into it. I still had my drop shot rod sitting right next. I had, 3 drop shot rods sitting next to one swim bait rod that was gathering dust.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I finally told myself, say, you know what? Like, there's potential here. I've seen it. Like, time to put everything down and go out and figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had one swim bait rod, and it wasn't even a dedicated swim bait rod. It was a G Loomis. It was one of the heaviest ones. I don't even remember the model number, but it was one of the heaviest ones that they had at Sport Chalet.
Yeah.
And I had a Cardiff 300 and 20-pound line, a Huddleston, and a BBZ. And like, I emptied the boat and went fishing. Forced myself to learn swim baits, and I really focused on the Huddleston because it just looked better. I mean, in the water, it looked better, and it was wintertime. Like, it was prime time for me to hook up.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Castaic every day. I skipped school. There was winter break, so sometime in there, winter break rolled around. But for me, it was all winter break. I was ditching class and all that stuff. I'm not proud of that, but hey, it is what it is. So I was ditching school, going to the lake, and I spent every day for 2 weeks on that lake from the time it opened until from sunset till, I'm sorry, I keep getting that back.
No,
from sunrise until sunset, I would be on the lake.
Yeah.
And I spent 14 days on that lake. It was 14 days to the mark before I got my first bite.
I knew that's where that story was going.
Yep. And then it was another, I think, 3 or 4 days. I don't remember exactly, but 3 or 4 days before I hooked up with my first fish on a swim bait. Like, on my own with the swim bait. And it was the Huddleston. And that fish, I caught it. Is around 9 pounds, shattered my personal best immediately. I was addicted. But this fish had no upper lip. All she had was a bottom jaw.
Yeah.
And she had to take, every opportunity she could to get a meal.
Yeah.
Really, I ended up catching that fish like 5 more times throughout the next few years. There's no other fish that like, I took pictures, and it's on my personal Facebook page in there somewhere. But the first time I caught her, I took pictures of her, and you can see that big, just lower jaw and open gap mouth. I mean, she had no way to actually trap food. It had to go straight down her throat.
Yeah.
But somehow ended up hooking that fish, even though she had no mouth, essentially, and shattered my personal best immediately. And then it was, I think, 3 or 4 days later, I was on the boat. I had already launched, and David messaged me and said, hey, do you want to go fish? And I said, I'm here. And so he didn't launch his boat. He just drove up and met me. And I make a bomb cat. I remember this like it was yesterday. So we're fishing. Nothing really is happening. Dave hooks up, catches like 8 or 9. And I know, like, I'm just saying that nonchalantly, but at that time, that was nothing.
Yeah.
For what the future was about to hold, for us. So he catches like 8 or 9. I'm pretty jealous. I make a bomb cast. It ends up catching wind and like hooking, going the wrong way. I make the most of it. There's one buoy that you could see bass stacking under this buoy. And most of the time, you would see them all the time. They just wouldn't ever bite anything.
Yeah.
And what it was is they were stacking under that buoy in the shade line. You'd see just like, there's the buoy, and then you see the cable holding the buoy, and then there's bass.
Elevator.
But they never ate anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was common. That was like seeing carp at the big dock that you launch at or something, at the marinas. So this cast kind of lines up that buoy, and I'm like, all right, cool. Like, I'm going to try not to hook the buoy.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, just wham, and hooked up with and landed what ended up being my personal best to this date, my second swim bait fish that I landed, ended up being still my personal best as far as largemouth.
Yeah.
And she was just shy of 16 pounds. She was 15.9.
Oh my gosh.
And so I've been chasing that ever since. Like,
wow.
For the equivalent, like if you're into hunting or deer hunting, this is the equivalent of shooting like a 30-point buck.
Yeah.
The second time you go hunting.
Your second sit ever.
Yeah. And it's like, it's not going to happen again. Or if it does, you've done something. So been chasing that ever since.
Wow, dude. Did you go to your buddy to get a skin mount for that one?
No. We took really good pictures. We took measurements. We ended up cutting line and stuff like that. And put her back in the water. I mean,
Wow. Did you make
took
that?
a handful of photos. And what's funny is back here in the paint booth, I finally decided to get a replica. It's not painted yet. I've got a painter in mind, and I'll say who that is after and I'll post some pictures and stuff, obviously. But I decided late last year to go ahead and get a replica of all my personal best fish. Well, my personal best largemouth, striper, and muskie.
Yeah.
And so the replicas are all sitting back here in the paint booth waiting to be painted. So I'm not going to paint them myself. I could, but I know myself and I would be so picky it would turn out horrible.
Yeah.
They would just end up being like some murky, muddy mess
Yeah.
of brown. So I'm going to have somebody else do it for me. And I'm stoked to finally have the fish that has drawn me into this whole rabbit hole back, up on the wall for the first time.
Dang, man. How many times, like every time you went to the lake, did you try to replicate that cast every single time just because the one time you did?
Yeah, your fishing memories at that point. But yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
I caught other fish off that same buoy, but nothing ever to that caliber.
Yeah. Couple trips down the season, you sound like Uncle Rico, and you're like, I caught a 16-pounder off this
Yeah.
table line the one day. I got to make this cast again.
Well, I still do that, on my home lakes. I still, if I take somebody, I live a little bit further from Table Rock than I do now, and now every time I go to Table Rock, I'm fishing memories. Like I'm trying to, and a lot of times you end up chasing memories, and I've learned you got to fish it for what it is and for the moment. And if you're chasing memories, it doesn't always pan out. Sometimes it can. Sometimes you can hit this one spot that paid off 10 years ago, and it'll pay off again. But a lot of times you gotta adjust, and that's been a hard learning curve.
Yeah.
Because when I go to like Table Rock, for example, like a lot of times I catch myself like chasing memories, and I should just focus on what's right in front of me and the next point, the next, the next cut, the next tree. So
Heck yeah, man. So I guess the other burning question, the kind of the main question to open up the can of worms is what was your beginning for KGB Swimbaits? When did that start and how did that start?
right. So my beginning for KGB Swimbaits is when I moved back to Arkansas. I left everything. I was hardcore into swim baiting. I didn't think it was going to work in Arkansas. Like it is just, I was going back to Arkansas, and that was that. So I left pretty much everything I had with my brother, who stayed in California. Gave all my swim bait stuff, and he got into swim bait fishing too. Like we dove pretty deep into it. We had a blast together. Some of the best memories I have are going out fishing with my brother doing swim baits. And that's eventually, ironically, Chad. So Chad. That's kind of where the Chad name came in. But I moved back to Arkansas and just didn't think it was going to work here. And when I got here, I'd calculated it pretty close. I mean, I was fresh out of high school, had a year or two of college under my belt, had mediocre jobs, and pretty much in my late teens, didn't have a lot of money. When I moved back here, I think I had like $1 or $2 left in my wallet. That was it.
Yeah.
And so what I started doing was cutting fire, and this does, believe it or not, this relates. So I started cutting firewood because I had access to a chainsaw. There was wood. There's a way to make money, right? Like had $1 or $2 in my name. Didn't even have enough gas money to get to town to put in applications for McDonald's or anything. I didn't want McDonald's anyways. So I'm cutting firewood. But when I moved back here, it's July, 110 degrees. Nobody's buying firewood in July.
Yeah.
And I'm posting up on the side of the road in my old farm truck that was still that we never sold our place in Arkansas. So we had rented it out, or my family did. And so we still had the farm trucks and all that stuff. So I'm sitting on the side of the road trying to sell firewood. And, $50 for a truckload. And I mean, piled high. That's a lot of work. And I didn't have a wood log splitter either. This is all
axe. Yeah.
Hand split. So, it'd be 2 or 3 days go by and somebody's like, this poor kid, I'll give him $50, So they see the same kid on the side of the road with the same load of wood for 3 or 4 days. Eventually somebody's going to feel sorry for you. But during that time, obviously I had a lot of time to kill. And so I getting back into fishing a little bit, going to the farm ponds, same farm ponds where I started fishing.
Yeah.
And I just got curious. I'm like, I wonder if they'll eat a swim bait. I didn't have money to buy one. So when I was out cutting firewood, I cut down a cedar tree and let it dry for, during the summertime, they dry pretty quick.
Yeah.
And took a chunk of cedar to, it was my dad's grinding wheel, for just like a regular grinding wheel for his lawnmower blades, not designed for wood at all, but I made it work. And I carved a bluegill, and I wish I should have gathered. It's here somewhere. I have the very first bait I ever made.
Wow.
It's somewhere here. I'd have to go hobble around and look for it. But end up carving a bluegill on his grinding wheel and took a picture. I had this brilliant idea of taking a picture and putting it on a bait instead of painting. I didn't know how to paint it this time.
Yeah.
And so took a picture, went down to the local shop who I did have, I'd sold a couple truckloads of firewood, so I had enough gas money to get down, and convinced this shop to print me off a sticker of an image of a bluegill, and slapped it on there, clear coated it, and went fishing. And it caught fish. And it was just like, I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to work. And I had no idea what I was doing. I just had the Huddleston and the BBZ to go off of. And that was just memory because they were in California.
Yeah.
And anyways, I made a swim bait, very crude, very rudimentary swim bait, but it worked and it caught fish. So I got excited and started making, another one, got a job at the local hospital. Nothing fancy. I was the guy who delivered food to the patients.
Yeah.
And so I started making a little bit more money and started buying more stuff to make swim baits. And the first ones, here's what's funny about them too. The very first ones, the hardware for it was like the brass hardware that you would hang pictures with.
Oh,
I'd found in the house, in my dad's toolbox collection, I found a bunch of eye screws, but they were the brass ones for hanging pictures.
Yeah.
And that's the hardware in my first swim baits. They're huge.
Man. Was that first bluegill, was it a 3-piece gill?
Yes, it was.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah.
I believe. I'd have to go back and look at it. It was not I don't believe it was a glide bait. The glide baits weren't even really a thing then.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
It's so long ago.
Yeah.
Let me just look and see if it's in.
Oh, you're good.
It is somewhere. If I have it within reach, like I don't think it's going to be. I got 2 more places I can look real quick. It is not within reach. I can't. Man. I'm not going to waste your time hopping around on one leg.
You're good, man. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, that the glide bait wasn't really, because that's probably what, around 2008 you're talking, 8, 9.
That's when they really took off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that was the start and like the explosion of glide baits.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, you probably, like you said, like a 3-piece gill, and the fact that you caught fish on it is just absolutely hilarious. I mean,
yeah.
I always talk about it, that's always kind of how it seems like every young guy, teenager who gets into swim bait fishing at one point or time, they just think to themselves, I can carve a bait. I don't need to spend $60 on a bait. I'll just carve something of my own. And I carved a 2-piece wake bait that I posted it on my Instagram, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, like that actually swims kind of good. And I still have that bait in my parents' house too. I never fished it or never did anything with it, but that's always a point that I make, because I always ask people, like, did you ever mess around with making baits? They're like, oh yeah, I made a rat, or I made a wake bait. And I was like, it's like the inaugural thing for a young guy to do when he's getting into swim bait fishing. He doesn't feel like spending any money yet.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you see these prices and you're like, no, and then you make one, you're super proud of it, but at the same time it's super humbling, and you're like, oh, I get it now. Okay.
Yeah. So, it falls apart on your second fish. Like, maybe I'll spend the money on somebody else's.
But for me, it was truly a financial driven thing to make my own swim baits, because I couldn't afford them. Like, it's that simple. And this is still like early. Let me see. This would have been 2009, 2010, in that era. So like, still at that time, like, good technology wasn't available. Like, it was there, but it was kind of in the, it was still up and coming. Like, Amazon wasn't still.
It was a book
readily available. Like, it just wasn't a thing for me. That's the thing. I know it existed. I know you could order stuff online and have it shipped to you. But like, unless, for me, I was the type of guy, I was working for cash still essentially at the time. And if I couldn't put my hands on it and receive it right there in the moment, I didn't get it.
Yeah, right.
That was just the situation I was in.
Yeah. Yeah. So once you get your, quote unquote big boy job and you start making some money and stuff, did
Yeah.
you start buying like carving tools and sandpaper and stuff to kind of help ease the process a little bit?
Yeah, so I finally saved up and got like a Dremel, a Dremel. Now we have like, surplus Dremels out there. But I finally got a Dremel, and that really changed a lot of things. And my first baits were really like, I found some of the first drawings that I had. I would do a drawing and I was trying to mimic what I was using back in California. And again, like so ironic and almost bad to admit, but I was trying to copy the BBZ,
Yeah.
but it was nowhere near a copy. It was just like that was my inspiration.
Hmm.
I had no access to make the soft tail or anything like that.
Yeah.
Like, it's just my inspiration. This is what I was familiar with using, so let's try to do that again.
Hmm.
And I had hard materials to work with, so I couldn't make the Huddleston.
Right.
All I could make was like 3-piece baits.
Hmm.
And so what's funny is I look at the drawing and look at what what I ended up with, and they are two totally different things.
Yeah.
They are nowhere near the same. Um, but yeah, it was kind of cool, experimenting with dremeling and joints and all that stuff, and started fishing them more and more, um, saving up more and more. Got my, shortly after getting into the hospital, I ended up getting a job. It was a part-time job for the local fire department, and basically for every emergency call that you went to and responded to as a volunteer, you got
Yeah.
paid for.
Yep.
And then that was your foot in the door to go full time. So eventually, I ended up going full time.
Hmm.
Started making some decent money. Like, um, that fire department was still really small town, but it was a living wage.
Yeah.
I mean, it was getting by. I was doing a lot better than I was.
Right.
And so I dropped the hospital pretty much immediately. And so the fire service, you work, at least at that fire department, you work 1 day on, 2 days off.
Okay.
1 day on, 2 days off, just repeat through the year. And so I had a lot of free time.
Hmm.
And I had to do something with that free time. And that was fishing and carving baits.
Hmm.
And so eventually I saved up enough and got a little bass boat. Didn't spend a whole lot on it, but found a bass boat, drove over to almost Tennessee, picked up this little Skeeter. I'm a Skeeter fan. So picked up a Skeeter, brought it back, and I was like, man, now I got to build some baits to put in it.
Yeah.
And so I built a handful of baits and found there's a place. I'm sure there's places like this all across the country, but there's a place where bass and trout mix.
Hmm.
And so I started making trout.
Yeah.
And that really refined what I was doing as far as carving baits, and actually started to understand like the differences of what they do.
Hmm.
And so that's whenever like the key really turned on, and everybody at the fire department, you're talking about small town in the Midwest, or South, and nobody believed in what I was doing.
Yeah.
Like, everybody's laughing at you, like, what are you doing? You're wasting your time. Oh my
Yep.
gosh. Like, can't believe you're spending money on this.
Hmm.
And my family always supported me on it. And eventually made some good baits that were catching fish.
Hmm.
And finally, the first bait, this is the one bait that I don't have to show an example of, unfortunately. It's at my house because I only have a handful of them. I still try to collect them if I see them come up for sale.
Hmm.
Made a 3-piece bluegill with the full intent of making it out of resin.
Hmm.
This is the first, like, I did a shad before that. It's jogging memories doing this with you. I'd made a shad before that out of resin,
Hmm.
but it was a total fail. It broke. It was a really good shad profile. I think it was 4 pieces, about 5 inches, a lot of little parts, and it was very fragile.
Yeah.
I mean, it would catch fish, but it would break.
Hmm.
I'd sent some to Zach Burge, actually, when he, in his, I think he was just entering his career as a fisherman.
Yeah.
And I'd sent some to him, and he's like, dude, I'm smoking them, but they break. Dang it. So dropped that project and went straight to a bluegill because that's what was getting me success on the farm,
Hmm.
on the farm
Yeah.
ponds. And I made a 3-piece bluegill with a full intent, carved it with the full intent of making it out of resin.
Hmm.
And the first carving I did, it killed it. It was awesome. Like, best bluegill that I had still to this date ever fished. As I'm talking to you, I need to bring that thing back. It's a really good bait. Really simple, 3-piece bluegill with a hardtail, and I ended up making a whole bunch of them.
Mhm.
And that was my introduction, and actually like production baits.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just really cool how that all came about. It was just went from I'm making baits, I'm making a handful of baits at a time. This is a really good bait. I want more of them. How do I do this? So I started dabbling and just spending money. I refused to do YouTube. Like I refused to go and look up anything. I wanted to learn it all on my own.
Yeah.
And so I spent a small fortune, experimenting and learning by trial
Mhm.
on what works and what doesn't. And I feel like for me, I feel like that made me a better builder.
Right.
I feel like I have for myself anyways, I feel like I have a really in-depth knowledge of how these materials work and what makes them, how to make subtle changes that make a
Yeah.
big difference. Because I did not have anything written down. There was no book on it. There was no cheat code. It was like you had to spend your own money to figure this out. And every time something fails, that's wasted money.
Yeah.
And so that really makes you focus on it more and take it more seriously. And I think somehow in between spending my fire department checks on resins and mold materials and stuff like that, somewhere along the mix, I just really got serious about it. Um, and it was still, even then, kind of a hobby, but I was really serious about this hobby.
Yeah.
Um, and that was the beginning years to KGB Swimbait. I'm talking back in 2000. That's when that was 2012,
Okay.
2013. In that era, like the first, from 2010 to 2013, went to from carving wood baits to okay, now let's replicate out of resin.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's
Uh,
make them so we can make them a lot faster.
exactly. And then what led to it being, well, I'll be skipping some steps if I'll be skipping some of your questions that you had sent me.
No, you're
So,
good. I guess
um,
were you sending or like were you calling your brother and sending him any of these baits and stuff to see if they
yeah,
worked out in California?
yeah. So that's a funny question because we didn't script this.
Yeah.
That's a really good question, and I like it because I have sent my brother one of every single model that I've ever done.
Okay.
So he has the actual true history and logbook of KGB Swimbaits, even
Yeah.
more than myself, because there's
Right.
baits that, like I was talking about that 3-piece bluegill, I only have a couple of them, and
Mhm.
I have to go look for them. They're not even here. I think they're hanging in my garage at the house. So yeah, that is such a good question. That's like hitting a note because he has the true history from start to finish. I sent him one of everything I've ever done, or at least one,
Yeah.
sometimes, 10 or 15 or 20 of everything I've ever done. And so
Yeah.
one day I want to get with him and like put together like,
Like a
you know,
shadow box or
the
something that's
timeline of
yeah,
what
yeah.
happened and see the progression.
Yeah. So he's got baits that you may have only made 4 or 5 of and like caught a fish on them and they broke. So you're like, I'm not gonna waste my
Oh
time
yeah.
with this anymore, or just put it to the wayside and never got back to it again.
Yep. Yep. He's got all those baits that have been forgotten. And unfortunately, like here's the sad part is now that it's like taken off and it's actually like a real business.
Mhm.
Um, I think I need to send him baits to catch up. Like
Yeah, yeah,
business has taken off, and I've gotten older. I've got a kid now, and he's doing his thing, and I need to like go back and make sure he's got one of everything just to keep that going because I
right,
think we've
yeah.
skipped a few.
Mhm.
That's probably a normal thing. Like it was never my intentions to create a logbook. It's just he was one of my biggest supporters along with my mom and dad, and I wanted them to have like one of everything.
Yeah.
And
And I
once I
guess
realized that that was like a living history of KGB Swimbaits, I don't know how big this is going to get. This might
mhm,
be, that collection may, you know, to me, it's just more of a logbook of memories. It may be one day, it may be worth $1 million. I don't know.
yeah,
Um, but I need to go back and make sure he's got one of everything.
yeah, that's awesome. Is there stuff oh, I know there is because you've kinda already mentioned it, but that you look back on, like, when you were first learning how to mold and cast resin and stuff, and you're like, "I was such a dummy, like, I should have been doing this, and I had no idea."
Actually, kind of the opposite.
Oh,
There's some
really?
stuff that I did on the early days, like on that 3-piece bluegill,
Mhm.
that I wish I could replicate today if it wasn't for the time. Like I've almost had to, and this is going to sound really bad, but I've had to almost dumb it down in some ways
Yeah.
in order to make production actually successful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know that sounds horrible, but what I mean is like that early bluegill, there was no weighting in it at all. It was all in the resin pour. So like I don't use premixed resin. That's one of the kind of the cheat codes I'm talking about when I talk about YouTube and all that stuff. There's some resins out there that already have the microballoons mixed in
No.
and all
Yeah.
that stuff. Like they float when you mix it all up, and
Yep.
that's your resin. And it turns out beautiful. It's nice and smooth. It's white. Like it's pre-made resin ready to go. I never wanted to go that route. I tried it, didn't like it. I've always mixed my own recipe from resin, adding flotation to it.
Mm-hmm.
So without flotation, resin sinks like not quite like a rock, but it's really heavy.
Yeah.
Um, so what I'm getting at is in those early days, that first bait that I really tried to push, which was the bluegill, there was no weighting inside. That was all resin. So the bottom half, and you had to get it just right. And it wasn't just like one, like each section had to be poured differently. So the bottom, section of the head would be filled this much with solid resin.
Mm-hmm.
The mid section would be filled up, so much, and the tail, and then the top portion would be, you would have flotation to it.
Yeah.
And my idea at the time was that California is like anti-lead.
Mm-hmm.
California doesn't like lead. They don't like it for their hunting ammunition. They don't like it for in the water. Like they're very strict on all their crap. So I was like, if I'm ever going to sell this bait, I don't want to have to do that whole lead-free, cancer crap. Like these resins are loaded with cancer, but I won't have to slap that sticker on there. So, so those first baits, I was successfully doing like balancing baits, getting them to sit level in the water, getting them to swim true and everything without any additional weighting.
Yeah. It was all just through the micro balloons and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
No like today, like any bait that I have, the whole mixture is the same. And then you have to position weights in certain places, just like any ABS bait, they have weights inside of them. And if you position it too far back, it's going to, I was doing that all within the mixture and within the pouring. And so it's kind of, that's where I say it's almost the opposite. Like I had to, in order to actually make production work and make things faster, I started having to add lead, which actually kind of undid a lot of my learning before. So I almost learned back, like I learned the most complicated way possible and then kind of hopefully simplified it from there.
Yeah.
And I'm still learning to this day. There's still, the guys come to me and be like, hey, we're experiencing this. Every day humidity changes things. Temperature changes things. There's so many changes when you're working with resin materials. And as no matter how controlled we get it, we can't control everything.
Yeah.
And so that's some of the tolerances and the changes with handmade products is handmade baits is like, we might pour the same bait this month. If we pour that same bait, 2 months from now or 6 months from now, we're going to have to adjust that recipe.
Yeah.
And they may sink a little bit faster, a little bit slower than they do. And it's not just water temperature. It's just the whole combination. They're still handmade products. We're mixing, when we pour baits, we're pouring 1 to 2 at a time.
Yeah.
And so when we do a batch of 200 baits, that's one person that went either mixed 100 cups or, 50 cups or 200 cups.
Yeah.
However it falls for that particular bait and that recipe, these are poured 1 and 2 at a time.
Yeah.
And so, there's a lot of variables that can affect that. And that's what makes each bait, like literally each bait special. Even though we're producing a ton of them, they're still special. Like,
man, that's crazy. How long did it take you to realize that what you were doing was kind of special? Because at the time, I mean, I was like 11 years old. So obviously, I have no skin in the game. But like at the time, it wasn't like garage building is like it is now. So at what point in time did you realize, like, man, like KGB is kind of on a statue with a couple other guys? Like, I need to kind of really take this seriously and come at it from a different standpoint, or make it more of a business thing.
Today, pretty much every day I wake up with that. I'm just like, I wake up in shock every day. No, I would say about 6 years ago, when I made the move from Harrison over to actual Northwest Arkansas, it became, I didn't have like my house and like I was still living with my dad before I moved over here. Like in my, mid-20s, I was still living with my pops. So like working at the fire department, it wasn't a glorious job. I wasn't making a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
I decided, I started dating a girl and decided to move over here. Vanessa, I started dating Vanessa and decided to move over to where she lived. And at that time, then I had to have, find out a way to get a shop. And I had a friend who had a shop, and he had a little storage space in the back. And he's like, man, like it's just storage. If you want to clean it out and use it, you can.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did. And then, Vanessa, she had a kid already when I met her. And if I was going to justify spending time away from her and her kid, like it had to be worthwhile.
Right.
And so I started putting time into it, putting more and more time into Swimbaits, into KGB Swimbaits. It had to be somewhat justifiable, but it still, to me at that time, was still kind of a hobby. It was a hobby that was making supplemental money.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was no way to live off of it yet at all, but it was extra cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hired a couple firefighters to help me out. With the fire department schedule, it's really good. And, I knew them from going through the fire academy the second time. I had to, I went through the fire academy the first time, but this new fire department, I got hired on over here where I'm at currently. And, I had to go through the fire academy again, like 10 years later, and a little older, a little more broke down, but
yeah.
It hurt a lot more, but went through it and made some really good friends. And it's like, hey man, I got something I can pay you cash for.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Every firefighter is looking for a second job.
Yeah.
If you know a firefighter that's not looking for a second job, their wife is rich.
Yeah.
Okay? Like it's that simple. They're doing firefighting for fun. They don't need to do it. Because every firefighter that I know, they have a second job.
Yeah.
So I was hiring these guys, paying them cash to come in on their days off and help me build baits.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, cool. If I'm doing that, like I got to actually be making money.
Yeah.
And so that kind of grew and grew. And then Vanessa and I found out we were going to be pregnant with Benson. Like when we found out she's pregnant, it's like, okay, cool. And she kind of told me, she's like, hey, a lot's about to change. She's already been through this once. And I was like, okay. She's like, hey, I don't think you understand. A lot's about to change. I was like, all right. She's like, no. She's like, you either got to take this serious and see what it can do, or you got to drop it. So it kicked in. I'm like, okay, I'm going to make a full effort on this.
Mm-hmm.
And so made a full effort, hired another, had 3 guys working part-time, I think I'd hired a 4th at that time, and everybody's just part-time at this point, and made a real go at it and said, all right, we're going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And, I had 9 months to get ready for it and see if it was going to work. And, at the end of, I think we were 8 months in, and we kind of ran the numbers, and we're like, okay, this can work.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, I was going to either have to drop it and quit or continue and really push for it. So at that point, I'm like, all right, now 9 months later, now it's time to hit the throttle again, like punch the throttle one more time.
Yeah.
And so Benson was born. I was going to the fire department, taking care of a newborn. And anytime that I didn't have, like I was sleeping, 2-3 hours a night,
mm-hmm.
and then headed to the shop to make baits. I'd be at the shop at, I'd show up at 11 p.m., work until 7 a.m., go back to the house, make sure the kid, wake, everybody's awake, getting awake at that time. And mom was having to go to work. I would stay up until, take care of the kiddo all day,
mm-hmm.
have dinner ready. She would come home exhausted. Like I had more maternal leave than she did, or paternity leave.
Mm-hmm.
At the fire service. Like the paternity leave was amazing. So I had more time off than she did. And so I'd be taking care of the kid, working nighttime and sleeping, 2 to 3 hours.
Yeah.
And then going to the fire department.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was working like essentially 4 full-time jobs.
Yeah.
It felt like. And when Benson, I think it was before he turned, he was about 6 months old. We had bought a house. Like we decided, okay, this is the real deal.
Mm-hmm.
We crunched the numbers again. So I'd done it 9 months and about 6 months. We crunched the numbers again, and they made sense for me to quit the fire department. Long-term goal was to quit the fire department.
Yeah.
found a house that had a shop, because at the time, every bait that I tune every bait, and I would have to take them down to the local, city lake
Yeah.
and tune every single one.
Uh-huh.
Rain, snow, didn't matter. Like rain, shine, snow, hail, didn't matter. I had to still work and tune
Yeah.
these baits. So we found a house. We found a house with a shop and a pool. It's like, boom, cool. Jumped on it.
Yeah.
Very expensive. And it was out by the lake too. Beautiful house. Uh, yeah, jumped on it, put in a bid or put in our offer, and they accepted. And we're like, oh crap. now it's a real deal.
Yeah.
So I think that's the time after Benson was born and realized that this is a viable thing and all this responsibility like piled on me.
Mhm.
That's when it was time to like that's when I realized it was something.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a long-winded
No, dude,
answer to
you're
your
good.
question.
You're good. You're getting through these questions, but you're
Yes.
giving it everything. And I mean, it's not really leaving me any stray questions to ask because you're telling me the whole story.
This may end up being a 2 or 3-part episode thing, or maybe a really long
Yeah,
episode,
yeah.
but I've really wanted to go in depth with somebody at some point on some of the details that I've not really like I've expressed from time to time, but I've not got to sit down and do it all.
Yeah.
So this is
No,
my
dude, that's
opportunity to do that.
that's completely okay. Well, I guess kind of the next question I'd had was what point did you realize KGB was more than a one person show? Like
Yeah.
when you yourself wasn't able to keep up with the man, but it sounds like even kind of from the beginning, it always been like you having a couple guys to help you out whenever you needed it by the sounds of it.
Right. But then that kind of like if I had to switch your question up a little bit, like what time did I actually need like full
Yeah,
real help?
full time, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was after we bought the house out at the lake.
Hmm.
So we bought the house out at the lake. The firefighters, they stuck it out for almost a year. And I think they got, at this point, I was having to take it more and more serious.
Right.
Like, this is why, sorry, guys, I can't do cash anymore.
Hmm.
Well, they really liked that whole cash deal.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I was like, dude, we have to go payroll. Like, I'm sorry. Like, taxes, like,
Mhm.
this is legit. We have to do things on paper.
Yeah.
Like, this is real now. I can't hide this kind of like, this is equaling my fire department pay.
Hmm.
I can't just like, I can't hide that anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
And I plan on actually growing this.
Yeah.
So like this, I don't want it to just stick around and be a hobby anymore. Like I want to really dive into this. And so we're going to have to do payroll. And that ran one of them off like almost immediately. Another one stuck around for a little while. And I think they were best friends anyways. And I think he just kind of got burnt out. So I had to, search for new guys. And actually the guys that I hired after that became full-time, they were customers that became employees, local customers that became
Okay.
employees. And yeah, they were full time. Just right off the bat, like, yeah, I need somebody here every day. Can you do
Mhm.
it? And one of them now is still one of the painters that I use today.
Oh, wow.
He ended up getting. I feel like he just got kind of burnt out on
Yeah.
how much pressure there was on all that stuff because
Mhm.
like there was a lot of pressure on him when I wasn't there. It was up to him, right?
Right.
Like we could both. I taught him everything I know from how to pour them, how to balance them, and all that stuff. And I was still working at the fire department at that time. So I'd be gone for 2 days, and he felt this responsibility to show what he could do in those 2 days.
Mhm.
And like he was burning the midnight oil. Like he
Yeah.
was, I feel like just over time with some other reason, he got burnt out and he ended up leaving me.
Mhm.
Left me for almost a year and a half, kind of somewhat bitter. Like I talked him into staying once or twice, and finally it was just like, all right, dude, like you want to go,
We're done.
go.
Yeah.
Um, about a year and a half passed, and I reached back out to him like, hey man, how you doing? Like it wasn't anything on bad terms or anything like that.
Mhm.
So obviously I wouldn't have been reaching out if it was.
Yeah.
And reach out and say, hey man, how you doing? He's like, I'm doing good, man. I'm like, hey, you want to paint full time? He's like, well, what are you talking about? Because painting was his passion anyways.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to paint full time? Like, I think this thing has grown enough. Like, you've stepped out. I've had to make changes and make things work. And you want to paint full time? Yeah, yeah, I do. And so he ended up quitting. He had found another job, and
Yeah.
he ended up quitting that job to go paint full time. And he was a little nervous at first. Had to talk his wife into it, but worked out really good. He's one of the, I think, top 3 painters in the country. But I guess that's kind of like going down a sidetrack.
Mhm.
no, the firefighter guys left. I still had a family to take care of. Found a couple guys to work, solid guys, and just kind of slowly kept on one at a time. Hired one guy,
Yeah.
and eventually hired his son, which is now like my lead guy in the shop.
Hmm.
Um, then know a buddy, hire him. Like I've had to weed through, not intentionally. I'll work somebody until they don't want to work anymore. And I know that sounds like, God, that sounds really bad. I try to keep my team as whole as I can all the time. Eventually, if somebody gets burnt out, then I've never really truly fired somebody. I don't
Right.
feel like, if somebody leaves, I try to, I don't want bad. I just don't want bad connections. I don't know
Mhm.
what else to say it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if anybody's left, it was either mutual or, you know, or they just decided they wanted to leave.
They were ready for something
But
else.
in
Yeah.
doing so, we find replacements. Like there's been times where it's been hard, and it's a small business still. Like I've got 5 full-time guys, and well, 4 full-time guys, and myself, and then a couple of part-time guys, and you know I feel like I've got the strongest team I've ever had right now of people who are just like positive, motivated people. Like everybody comes in every day happy. Like I don't have to. There's been times through business, through growing pains, where you come in and you're putting pressure on these guys to perform, and you've got pressure, like I've got pressure to make their paycheck actually happen.
Yeah.
And through the growing pains, there's been some tensions at times, and it's not easy. Like it is not. There's nothing easy during that growth period where their family's paycheck depends on me actually providing and selling baits to pay them, but then they're feeling pressure. Like it can get messy at times, and it's not all rainbows and butterflies. Like there's times where it gets downright stressful,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
especially when you have other people depending on you for their paycheck every 2 weeks, whether you have the money or not.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. And
it
that's
gets
like,
stressful.
I was going to say, like, being a bait builder needing to hire help, it's not like you're posting on Indeed or something like that. Like you had
Yeah,
kind of mentioned earlier how some of your first guys were a couple of customers, like local guys, and that
yeah.
can be a good thing, but it can also be a good thing if some of the people you hire have absolutely no idea what the swim bait world is, and you just say this is what you got to do, and they're like, okay, I can do that, and so they don't have
Dude,
like any skin in the game.
yeah, you nailed it. You want that experience with you, but you can also start to butt heads. I've had those people that know a
Yeah,
lot about swim baiting, and eventually you kind of start to butt heads because just different ideologies of how the business should run. And then obviously, I'm like, I mean, I think people get my personality. Anybody who's watched me and seen me, they can see my personality, and like I value other people's opinion a lot.
mhm,
That's what helps me. I feel like be a good builder. I take other people's opinions into consideration.
yeah,
And then if you have somebody else who's also swim bait related, then they have their idea of how it should go. You have your idea of how it should go, and sometimes you can butt heads, and it's not, it's not the easiest thing to navigate.
yeah,
Um, and how to keep people's feelings in consideration when you're doing that. Like, hey man, I really appreciate your input, but I'm going to do this instead,
yeah,
because then you've got to have them work for you for the rest of the week.
yeah,
And I mean, you could it's not easy to navigate at all. This whole if somebody's out there thinking that they can just start pouring resin, and even if they have like a killer design and they're going to make this thing explode, like there's a lot to it to navigate. I don't want to discourage anybody. If somebody's hopeful out there, like guide them through that, like best of wishes, and I hope the best of success.
I'm sorry, guys. Like I said, don't use Zoom a lot. So it asked me for a time earlier, and I didn't know that Zoom is really strict on their timelines. That even if you're in the middle of talking during a quote unquote meeting, they cut you off the time you picked. So I just picked an hour and a half. So went past that. Obviously, that's why we got the boot. But we're back here. So, oh man, I can't. I know we were talking about employees and stuff
Yeah,
right after we were rudely interrupted. Do you know exactly where we were?
I don't, but I can join right. I can kind of fall back right back in line. I feel like so.
Yeah.
And this can be a KGB Tells All, so that's why we went past the
Yeah,
hour and
yeah,
a
yeah,
half. You can
exactly.
title it as that if you want to. So.
Perfect.
Um, so yeah, as far as employees, different personalities, different. There's, it's not always rainbows and butterflies.
Mhm.
Um, you get some ups and downs. You can butt heads. You have, if I hire somebody that's already into fishing or specifically into swim baiting, that's a great wealth of knowledge to help, but also they have a direction that they feel like it needs to go. And, I'm kind of guiding this ship. So you can start to butt heads, that's happened. Then you have guys who don't know anything and you have to bring them up to speed. So, finding good employees can be difficult, especially in such a niche market. Like this is a very niche deal or niche deal. Sorry. It's a very small corner of everything. So it's a small corner in the fishing industry. The fishing industry is already a small corner as far as employees and all that stuff. So, I mean, to find what I feel like is a dream team, which I feel like I have now, it's taken some work to get there. There's no ill feelings towards anybody that has worked for me or anything like that. It's, everybody has shared their time and place and took some wealth of knowledge with them. And the guys who are currently working for me are gaining knowledge every day. And so, now it's really cool. I'm finally in the place now to where I had to take a step back about a year and a half ago, and find myself working on the business instead of purely in the business. And what I mean by that is like, I don't paint baits anymore. I'm not the one out there pouring baits. I had to quit being part of it to make it actually work, if that makes sense. But I'm still very much a part of it. It's just I had to not micromanage and actually find a way to turn this into a viable, like what I feel like, every year I feel like it's becoming more and more viable, and it is obviously, but it's still, still mind blowing that I can walk in today and see 200 to 300 baits that were built, over the past week and a half, ready to go out for paint. And I had very little to do with it. That's something that for me, it's still mind blowing to be at this point. And I don't know where it's going to be in another year or 2 years from now. Like it's just weird. And I wish I had my hands on every single bait. If it was going to be a successful business and try to even halfway meet the demand, there's no way that I could. So I have to have trusted employees to do their job, do it very well, keep them happy, keep them, a positive attitude coming into work and not be burnt out. Some of these jobs, doing this at the level that we're doing it, they're not glorious. I got one guy that's been sitting in one spot, pretty much sanding and filling little pinholes and stuff like that for the last 6 months, and that's not a glorious job. How do you keep somebody like that motivated and happy? And that guy walks in with a smile on his face every single day. And I can't, there's no way I could pay these guys $200,000 or $300,000 a year. And I don't make that, So it's like, how do you make them happy? And it's just finding the right person for the job. And I feel like I've not had, I hate to use the terminology, and I don't believe I've had to do it, is like weeding through the bad ones to get the good. I've never had what I feel like is truly a bad one. It's just finding the right person for that fit.
Perfect. Do you, when new guys come on or guys have been there for a little while, do they ever like point something out like, hey, Kevin, we could maybe do this in the process to make it a little bit more efficient, make it maybe a little bit easier on my end? Have you guys kind of refined the process into something that just works super well now? I mean, you just mentioned turning around 200-300 baits in a week and a half, 2-week time span. I mean, that's nothing to shrug your shoulders at. That's pretty crazy to think about.
Yeah. When you're talking about fully finished product, like, I have the rotation I have down with 3 painters. We're receiving, roughly 200 baits a week back that are painted, ready to go. And so we're turning that out. We reserve some baits, and inevitably, even after paint, some baits just don't pass performance test and all that stuff. But as far as the refinement, I feel like we have refined almost everything that we possibly can with the materials we have, but I'd never stop asking for newer, better ideas. I feel like if I did, that would be a immediate fail. So anybody at any given time, if they have an idea, bring it up, talk about it. Like, come in the office, let's talk about it. And this isn't like truly an office type thing. I mean, it's
a room.
It's a room, and then the rest is workshop. But it's like, dude, come in, talk to me, or come out here and show me what you're talking about. and I'm going to let you go through all of it. I'm not going to stop you at any point in time. This is the way I approach things. It's like, I'm not going to stop you at any point in time. I'm going to let you completely finish. 99% of the time, it's something I've already tried and done, but there's always that 1% chance, and it does still happen, that it's like, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah, like
Dang, dude.
those last two sentences they say or something that you just flips a switch in your head, like, oh, I didn't follow it that far. I'm glad I didn't cut you off. Like, I'm glad I let you speak
Exactly.
everything up. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why you can't stop them. Like, if they have an idea, like, let them fully. And I've learned that the hard way, because I've stopped people in the past. And they're like, but I didn't get to say this part, And luckily, they were bold enough, or not bold enough, but like they had it within themselves to not just stop because I've built baits before. They like, no, man, I wanted to show you this, and like, oh, that's a learning lesson. So I learned that like several years ago. It's just like, if somebody has an idea, let them show you. Like, come in and tell me about it, and then let's go out and do it. And then that's a learning experience for both of us, because either I might learn something really small and tiny that, I'm not I don't know it all. I'm learning every day, and they might show me something, or then I can turn around and be like, hey man, let me pull this bait out of the history book, and I'll show you, because I've done this before. Don't let that stop you from trying. A lot of times, like, hey man, like, if it's a new idea that I am curious about, I'll be like, hey man, don't go nuts on it, but spend, an hour, 2, 3 hours doing this, and let's see if it works. Like, I'm not opposed. I'm always willing to try something new.
Yeah.
And that's, most of the time, because of the way I learned this, because I didn't have YouTube to go to, or I did have it, I just chose not to.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it's something that I've already done like 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But every now and then there's something that's like, oh, like, why didn't, holy cow, like that's wrecking my brain on why I didn't do this earlier. And as far as tools and stuff, yeah, like I tell the guys all the time, hey, if you're at Home Depot, or if you're at Lowe's or Walmart, wherever you're at, if you see something that you think is going to make it easier on your job, buy it and I'll refund you. Like, I will pay you for it. Like, just go ahead and get it. No questions asked. Like, we don't need an Xbox. We don't need, I don't need a floor sander, but if it's a drill or a drill bit or something, doesn't matter what it is, just go ahead and buy it. Just don't go nuts. Like, $200-$300. Like, if it's below that, just get it and know that you will automatically be paid for it.
Yeah.
And bring it to the shop and we'll try it out. And if it doesn't work, then it'll either hit the trash or it'll sit there and gather dust. One of the two. So
Man, that's funny. What's it like when you guys drop a batch of baits? Like, what's the feeling, like the collective feeling when you guys, drop 200-300 baits on a drop and they're gone? Like, I guess like it's got to have an immense amount of pride. Like, wow, that's crazy. But it's also like, man, we're back at square one again for the next week until we start painting or start sanding again. Like, is there ever kind of mixed emotions along that way?
Oh, 100%. Sometimes we'll do a paint job that like one of the most recent paint jobs that I was nervous about was the barfish. I did like a barred. It's a barfish. It's a yellow bass.
Yep.
And I was nervous about it because on that paint pattern, that's a pretty specific paint pattern.
Yeah.
Not a lot of guys know about that. And I went all in. I did the whole batch. I'm like, you know what? I talked to the painter about it. I said, do all of them. He's like, are you serious? And he was nervous about it. And I think we had 200, roughly 200. And, the whole shop, they're like, dude, this thing is pretty.
Yeah.
But it's pretty specific.
Yeah.
And I was like, I know, but I got a feeling, I got a feeling. And
taking a gamble.
Yeah. And it is a gamble because like you can have a really good bait, but if you don't have the paint to match it, like if one thing is off that doesn't speak to the customers, like I may be counting on that batch to make, like, even though we're deep into this, like I don't ever take it for granted. And there's times where like that batch is going to pay for the next round of hooks, or that, we have enough for the hooks and a few other orders and stuff and payroll. And it's always a constant balance as far as running a business, as far as the accounts go. So like I still count on each and every batch to make numbers meet.
Yeah.
And, just as an example, that one was kind of a nervous batch for us, and boom, vanished. it was gone in an instant. And it was like, okay, cool. Like everybody was like, dude, I knew, after the fact, everybody's like, I knew that was going to do
I
good. It's
knew
like,
I knew it was gonna sell, man.
yeah.
I
And it's like
told you they were gonna
we
sell.
always anticipate that.
Yeah.
We just given the track record,
Mhm.
especially on certain baits like the Chad, that's this guy right here. That's another recent winner is this color right here. So, but we inadvertently can accidentally get a little. I've had batches that don't fly off the shelf,
Yeah.
and it makes you nervous. I've had batches last 2 or 3 days, which is ultimately my goal. I do not like as much as I like them flying off the shelf in seconds and all that. That's not my goal. My goal is to have them actually available to people. So, like, if I can have, and the way I've done that is I've reworked things. Before we would do batches of like 100 baits, 50 baits, 100 baits of a certain color, and then the next 100 be a certain color.
Yeah.
And even that was kind of a gamble to me at times. And now I was like, you know what, double it. Like, starting in January, I think I started formulating this game plan back in like October, November. And January, I put it in place. I said, we're going to double every batch.
Mm-hmm.
Like, whether it's a winning color, winning pattern, doesn't matter. Like winning bait, winning color, we're going to double every one of them and see. Hopefully, we get past that 1 to 2 minute mark.
Yeah.
And luckily, we've been able to get to where sometimes the baits will last 2 or 3 days on the website, which for us, a small business, is really good. It doesn't mean people aren't buying. It just means like we are finally producing what people want.
Mm-hmm.
We're not doing 100 in this color, 100 in that color, and it's just like here's everything we got.
Yep.
Take it or leave it. And it might last 2 days, 3 days, but that gives so many opportunities for guys to get their first one instead of it flying off the shelf in seconds.
Yeah.
So the Chad is still like incredibly in demand. It doesn't seem to matter what paint job we put on there if people are going to buy it.
Mm-hmm.
They're happy to get it repainted and all that stuff if they really don't like it. But also, I've worked with the painters and dialing in and honing in what really sells.
Yeah.
So the Chad, it still flies out, in minutes or seconds, and I'm proud of that. I totally understand the customer side of it because I kind of took a little bit of a step back from the business for a portion of last year. My personal life got kind of messy. Like it just got there was a lot. Like this running a business takes a toll on your personal life, and it did on mine. I'm not going to go into too much detail on that, but my personal life got pretty chaotic for a little while. And so I had to take a step back. I hired a good friend to come in and kind of like, hey man, can you look over this and like keep it going?
Mm-hmm.
And he did. And excuse me, I've got to thank him for that. So like everybody saw last year we were running with the TSG and Eric was a big thing. And that was Eric. He stepped in. He's a personal friend. He did a great job kind of looking after it, keeping it alive. Because there was a time where it was like, this can take a personal toll. I'm not talking about swim baiting and like specifically, I'm just talking about running your own business and like family life and all that stuff. And like, there was a point where it was like, is this worth it? Like, this is wrecking my personal life.
Right. Yeah.
And so kind of gave him the keys. And that's where the whole TSG thing came in too. For me, that was always the next, like I was still designing baits and stuff, but just kind of like took a step back. A lot of people got to know Eric through that and all that stuff. And so, Eric, he had his thumbprint. It was like, hey, we're gonna rename these to differentiate from the Spro baits and the KGB baits. We're gonna go with TSG. To me, they were always the Chad, always the legend. And so we've gone back to that, partly because trademark type stuff, and then another bait builder is using TS in his name. And so we just, to avoid any drama, it's like, you know what, we've got a trademark. Let's go back to KGB, like the KGB theme, and go with the Chad legend. Gosh, I've really kind of
you're
I'm
good
at sidetracking on these, but no, it's still a thing even today. Like you think you grow numb to it, and you kind of do in some ways. Like you grow numb to the baits just flying off the shelf and like knowing that that's going to sell out. But when you see it happen on our end, we see it happen. We're like, oh, sold out. Like, good job, man. And then you walk out in the shop and you're like, holy crap, that is wow. Like that's still happening. Like I don't know. It's a surreal feeling.
Yeah. What I guess the big thing that was more of a problem, probably this time last year when doing drops and them flying off and everybody, saying, "Oh, I couldn't get a bait," the bots or whatever it may be, the flippers and stuff. I guess this is a question I don't think I've ever really asked a builder. What does it feel like when you hop on a Facebook page or eBay or something and you see a Chad that the white bass or just any colorway and you see it going for $350 and you're like, there was 200 of those but they sold out in 25 seconds. Like, does that make you feel any certain way when you see baits get flipped for, double, triple what the MSRP was?
Yeah, it's a mixed. It's definitely mixed. It's like one, wow, that is the initial one is well for me. The initial one is frustration because it's like, how did I let that go to a flipper again?
Yeah.
Because if anybody knows my history, like I've gone to war with the flippers
Yeah,
to the
yeah,
point of
yeah.
my own demise. Like I cannot control it. Um, and I've absolutely gone to war with them. And one reason why is because that is a gateway for um, that's a gateway for counterfeit baits to pop into circulation. I experienced that.
Yeah, yeah, I remember
I
that.
started receiving baits. People would send baits back to me. I try to do customer service really well. Like if somebody has a bait that's not performing well, send it back to me. I want to see what went wrong.
Yep.
If it's a super old bait, I'll either fix it and send it back to you or replace it. I've always been that way. And I think that's part of what's got us to be where we are today is taking care of customers. You spend good money, you want your stuff taken care of.
Yeah.
But we received some counterfeits. And so like straight up counterfeits. Like these were not, this is not my resin. These are not my screws,
Yep.
but they're being sold on eBay as KGB Swimbaits for a premium price. They literally took one of our baits, molded it, and then sold it on eBay
Yep.
without ever tuning it, without ever actually getting anything right about it. Not even the sink rate. They didn't even get that right. And then that same company, and here's what's ironic about it, without getting too sidetracked, the guys who were doing that, they lived like 3 minutes away. They could have been anywhere in the country.
Yeah.
They lived 3 minutes away from where I started KGB Swimbaits in the
That's
same
crazy.
town.
Yeah.
It's like, and then they tried to start their own business.
Yeah,
And
I
it's
remember
off
that.
of a bait that you could clearly see was a Chad with clay added to it. It was just
Mhm.
like, once you're a builder, you start to recognize these
Yeah.
things. And it's like, what are you doing, guys?
Wow.
Anyways, put a stop to that. But that's the frustration with flippers to me is it opens a gateway for people to want to do things like that.
Mhm.
Um, and it can really hurt your image as a company.
Yeah.
Like I ended up getting 30 something, 40 something counterfeits back. And I know of more.
Wow.
It wasn't just 30 or 40. They put out a bunch.
Yeah.
I ended up getting 30 or 40 back. And each one of those had at least gone to one or two customers. So
Mhm.
now there's one of them went through 5 people's hands. So one of them exchanged hands 5 times. So there are 5 different people who now have a bad image of KGB swim baits because that bait wasn't up to their performance standards,
Right.
swam like crap.
Yeah.
They may never buy another KGB swim bait again.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, the whole eBay thing, that's partly why I'm in such a war with flippers.
Mhm.
At the same time, one of the first orders that I ever canceled, turns out the guy was a pretty like I didn't know anything about the guy. Caught that he was, I just saw that he was flipping baits, canceled his order. He ended up being a really bad guy, like really bad. Has a whole rap sheet, like harassment. Um, you know, he's a dangerous guy.
Mhm.
That made my family feel threatened.
Yeah.
Like, is this guy going to come out and do that same thing to us? He's known for harassment. He's known for, getting into physical altercations and stuff. Is this guy going to be pissed off enough to come down and find where I live?
Yeah.
Which you can, if little bit of homework, you can find where just about anybody lives.
Right. Yeah.
Most people don't. You have to be creeper status to do that, or you have to be cautious like me because I find out what
Yeah.
Once I found out that who this guy was, I'm like, oh crap, where's he live? Okay, New Jersey, cool. Um, anyways, the whole flipper thing is just it opens the door to a lot of bad things,
Mhm.
whether it's bad people such as that, counterfeiting, scalpers, people. It just leaves a bad image on me.
Yeah.
So I do as best I can. My only thing is the only people that can control the flipping market are the customers. Stop buying from them.
Hmm.
If you don't like the prices, don't buy it.
Yeah.
There's going to be somebody who wants it bad enough that they're going to buy it. And that is very humbling too. It's like, wow, somebody's willing to pay. That's the second feeling, is somebody's willing to pay that much for
Hmm.
something that came out of my shop. Holy cow. Like, do I need to raise my prices?
Right. Yeah.
But I don't want to, because then that eliminates a lot of other customers.
Hmm.
So it's really a mixed thing. It's very humbling. It's very frustrating. That's one of those things that I just have to, you know, I have, there's not much I can do about it. I also understand the guy who buys a bait, falls on hard times, and
Yeah.
needs to maximize as much as he can get out of it.
Hmm.
And I appreciate those people that do that. I have people who message me and like, man, I don't want to hurt, hey Kevin, you know, please don't hate me. I have to sell baits. I've fallen on hard times. I need to maximize as much as I can get. And I just wanted to let you know so you don't hate me. And I'm like,
Yeah.
damn, dude, like I don't want to be known as that guy either,
Right. Yeah.
So excuse my language. But yeah, I don't want to be, I don't know. It's a mix of feelings for being in my position.
Right. Yeah. Do you feel like that it's helped since you guys have started doubling batches and started dropping a lot of baits? Have you seen kind of from where it was at last year, even, maybe
Yeah.
2022 to compared to what you see now?
Yeah, I don't see near the flipping market, and
Yeah.
it's a lot more obvious whenever somebody is flipping.
Hmm.
Whenever somebody orders, I've kind of there for a while. We were pleased one bait per customer, and that helped
Yeah.
alleviate a lot of the demand. We've since backed off on that and said, if you want a bait, buy it again. Um, and now if somebody buys, 10 baits, it's like, you're up to something.
Hmm.
And so it's very clear to identify and be able to at least reach out. Something else I've done is implemented, which scares off a lot of flippers. Um, I have found out is through purchasing, when you do your purchase, you have to put your phone number in.
Yeah.
So now I can call you,
Hmm.
and I will call you.
Yeah.
Like
And see
I've
like,
called
hey,
customers.
yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't like, if you're flipping baits and you don't want to get caught, you're probably not going to go to that step of putting in your cell phone number.
Hmm.
And I have done that. I've called people and been like, "Hey, man, what's the deal?" And they're like, "Oh, you know what? Like, it's I'm buying for me and my fishing team. I've made that call and
Hmm.
found out it's for a high school fishing team.
Yeah.
Cool. You know what? I'll send you an extra. I'll send you a
Hmm.
couple extra.
Yeah.
I've also made that call and been hung up on immediately,
Once
and
you say,
then
hey, it's Kevin
tracked the
from,
address, and the address matches like 5 other names.
yeah.
Like, all right, cool. Order canceled.
Yeah. Man, that's crazy.
It's weird what people go through to get these, dude. Like it really is.
Yeah. Um, so this will
But
be
it has died down. Sorry, I
oh,
didn't want to cut you
no,
off,
no,
but
you're good.
yes, the flipping has definitely died down. Everything we've done to, all the measures we've taken, it's definitely things have settled down a lot.
Cool. So this question will kind of gear us towards the Spro stuff, but are you
Okay.
the main guy that's ordering hardware and ordering your tubs of resin and everything? Are you that guy that's ordering all that stuff, keeping everything in stock at the shop?
Yeah, so I'll get with my guys, pretty much every week and be like, hey, what do you need? Anytime I leave, before I leave, I'm like, hey, do you guys need anything?
Hmm.
And I'm always doing that.
Yeah.
But we've gotten on a pattern where we recognize the importance of inventory and all that stuff. And so we'll do an inventory check, at the end of every week or every other week. And, you know, I've got the new guy that, I've got kind of a head guy in the shop and a head guy who helps me in the office and in the shop. The new guy's Brennan Banks. He's in the office and shop. A lot of people know Brennan,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
hopefully he's okay with me telling that he works here now. I think he is. He's proud of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
So
I think he posted about it when
yeah,
it first happened. He'd made a post about it. I remember seeing.
excuse me. Yeah. So Brennan is stoked to be here. I'm stoked to have him. He's a very reliable guy who can be hands on out there in the shop, sanding on baits, literally from sanding on baits to helping pour them to
Mhm.
helping he can tune them. And then he can also be in here and, he's the one who's been taking pictures and uploading them to the site. I've cross trained him in a little bit of everything. So he's
Yeah.
really lightened my load, which is
Yep.
awesome. That's what I needed.
Hmm.
And so Brendan has full access to anything he wants to buy on Amazon. And if he goes too crazy, I'll let him know. But when it comes to the specialty materials, like I've got a logbook. I finally put together like a book of what we order, who we order it from, the
Yeah.
vendors, and all that stuff. And I still order that because that's the expensive stuff. When
Right.
I'm talking to, you know, $15,000 order from one vendor, I'm still a little bit micromanaging. I want to be in
You
control of
know,
that because I know the
you want to
bank
be the one that
accounts.
pulls the trigger. Yeah.
Yeah. So on big orders, like, I just wrote a check to Gamakatsu for, $12,000 for hooks. That should set us up for hopefully the next 6 months.
Yeah.
We'll see how far that goes. You're not talking small dollars,
No.
and it's still a small business. I want to be in control of that. Like, and there's certain things that I don't want the guys to feel pressure on. So like, Brenny has no control over the actual money flow and all that stuff. Like, he doesn't have access to it. I do, because I don't want him to feel responsible, or it's just, there's certain things that I want to take off of his hands. He doesn't have to worry about stuff. He doesn't have to look at the account when he's ordering something off Amazon. I see that. I can manage that, and I can schedule when we order things, and I can see the flow and know when we need to order things.
Yeah.
And it's a really harmonious balance right now.
Yeah. So that kind of leads us into the Spro thing, because I remember maybe you made a post about it, kind of explaining how it all happened. So I guess for anybody who doesn't know, you guys must be living under a rock, but Spro does make the ABS Chad, which I'm sure everybody has seen. So kind of how did that come to fruition? Where did that conversation start, and how did you get a hold of them to kind of kick that whole idea and process off?
It actually all kind of kicked off all at once on one phone call. I had been ordering hooks from I'm not going to throw anybody under the
Yeah,
bus.
no,
So
yeah.
I've been ordering hooks from the same vendor for a long time. Like, that's the original ones I started with up until we made the whole Spro deal happen. So what happened is, COVID happened.
Mhm.
And that changed a lot for every business. And for me, hooks were my hangup. I couldn't get hooks. I called my vendor and was like, I need to place another, 5,000 hooks on order. And they called me back and they're like, you have 35,000 hooks on back order. And I was like, what? I didn't realize. They're like, yeah, you've called like 6 times, and each time you call, you put 5,000 on order, and we don't,
You don't
you're up
have
to
them.
35,000 right now. We don't have them.
Yeah.
They're sitting out on half of them are sitting on a cargo ship out of San Francisco, waiting to come into the bay. The others are in San Diego, and the others, they're just all over the place. And I'm just like, when can I get these? And they're like, we have no ETA for you. And I'm like, I've been a vendor from you I've been a buyer from you for a long time. Like, you can't give me an ETA, you can't fly these in, like,
Yeah.
nothing. And they're like, they're all on a ship. I'm like, well, my business is about to stop. Like, at that point, I had to have the hooks to tune the baits. Now we've gotten to where we can tune the baits without hooks.
Yeah.
I still like to, because that's the finished final product.
Yep.
But at that point, it was critical.
Yeah.
Like, we were still hand weighting every single bait. Nothing was, certain things were internalized and other things weren't. So it was very critical for me to have hooks, or my business is about to stop.
Yeah.
And like, for me, it's all on the line.
Mhm.
It's still a growing business, have a lot invested, and Vanessa's working for my family income is on the business. And so I actually called Brennan. Another one of those full circle things. Called Brennan and was like, hey, like, I know you switch your hooks a lot and frequently.
Mhm.
Which ones are you using? It's like, oh, I'm using Gamakatsu round bit. I was like, okay,
All right.
cool. And so I scratched by for like another month of trying to find hooks, using every last hook I had in stock I was almost to the point of rubbing rust off other hooks, old hooks to put on these baits.
Yeah.
I mean, it was getting bad. And so I called Brendan again. I was like, hey, remind me who that was. And like, oh, it was Gamakatsu. All right, cool. So I looked up Gamakatsu and called their customer service number and was talking to that representative, like, hey, I'd like to place an order for hooks. You probably don't get this a lot. I just want to order a bulk amount of hooks.
Yeah.
Probably, maybe not what you're used to, but I'm bigger than a tackle store, but I'm not like Bass Pro Shops.
She's thinking like 500 or something. Like,
yeah, I was like, I need. Well, no, I was like, I need 5,000 hooks. Like,
yeah.
I'm bigger than your tackle shop, but I'm not Bass Pro.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, all right, cool. That's a pretty good order. I'm like, yeah, I know, but I need them. And so, okay, cool. I think, yeah, we can have these for you. We can have them for you in about 2 weeks. And I was like, sold. What's the price? Yeah. Like, I don't even care what they are. Like, what price is it? Just, I need them. he's like, all right, cool. So we got all the way to the email. And he's like, all right, so what's your email? And I was like, yada, 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 KGB Swimbaits. And he's like, Kevin? And I was like, who are you?
Yeah, yeah.
I thought I had some customer service representative. He's like, oh, I'm so and so. And again, I've never met this, and I don't know who this is. Like,
Yeah.
my head's been so focused on just this grind for the past
Finding
like
hooks.
4 years
Yeah.
that I don't know names or anything like that. I don't even know who's fishing the tournament series or anything. I'm just in the grind. And he asked, he's like, oh, do you want to do a collaboration? I'm like, no. I told him immediately. I was like, no, I don't want a collaboration. Because at this point, and here's why, is at this point, we were growing, we were becoming popular, really popular. And I had every painter, every small town has an airbrush artist.
Yeah.
Every single small town has an airbrush artist who paints fishing lures. And they're, I want to do your baits. Let's do a collaboration.
Yeah.
And I was so blown. Like, I just was overwhelmed with collaboration offers that I was just like, no.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Come back to me in 2 or 3 years when things settle down. And so I immediately said no to this sales rep on on the Spro, phone, or Gamakatsu phone. I didn't even realize that, like, it wasn't connecting to me that Spro and Gamakatsu were cousin sister companies.
Sister companies. Yeah.
Exactly. It didn't even register. I was just like I was in the grind, like exhausted, looking for hooks. And so then we start talking fishing and swim baiting and stuff like that. And then my ears perk up and I'm like, hey, well, who are you? Who are you? And he's like, oh, I'm so-and-so. I'm like, pretty much vice president of Spro Corp. And I'm like, what? I thought I had somebody just,
yeah.
I thought I found somebody in a cubicle.
Yeah.
And it was the guy, like, if there was somebody to talk to and make that decision, it would be him, which ended up being Sid Reeves with Spro. And so I was like, all right, cool. So, clarity hit. And I was like, so what did you mean by?
Yeah, you don't want to paint is what you meant.
Yeah. So what do you mean by, at this point, I'm like, what do you mean by a collaboration? It's kind of like hopeful wishing I didn't blow this whole deal. He's like, well, like, our whole company is based off, partnering with people to do designs and this and that. He's like, what do you think about doing something? He's like, I fished your baits. I have them. Like, I'm sitting here holding one. I'm like, well, yeah, let me think about this for a few minutes. Let me run it by, let me run it by Vanessa real quick and I'll get back to you. Hung up the phone, sprinted up to the house, told Vanessa, like, hey, I think something just happened. I don't know what it is, but something just happened. And I explained it to her and she's like, well, what do you think? Like, yeah, what do you think? I was like, I think I'm going to call this guy back. And so I called him back, talked to him, and we pretty much ironed out a deal almost right there on the spot. There was we had to come up with the contract. I'm not going to hide it. The contract they sent me was the same contract they would send for a pro staff. It was not like, I ended up writing my own contract and sending it to them. They read it over. They liked it. I don't know. I'm sure they had, attorneys. I've never asked about that whole side of it. I'm sure they had, somebody smarter than me look at it.
Proofread it.
And yeah, long story short, like, it worked out really, really well for the both of us. And took about 3 months to get to that point. And before we even had the contract done, we were already like working on a bait. Like, we already knew what we were going to do. We just had to get the
paperwork for the details to get hashed out.
Yeah, because when you're talking about that, like a potential deal like this, I knew the potential going into it. I think they did too. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been so comfortable, like, going for it. I wanted everything to be, I wanted all the, I's to be dotted, T's crossed and all that stuff. So there was so we don't ever have to revisit this uncomfortable situation again. And so it's like, let's get this uncomfortable, like, let's get this out of the way so we're both good, and then we'll just rock on. And so it took 2 or 3 months, and most of that was on my end of just trying to, like, word it properly and all that stuff, have it read over, and then pretty much by the time the paperwork was done, so was the first, like, they were receiving the first bait to knock off. And that's essentially how it worked. I sent them, 2 baits. I sent them the textured Chad, and I sent them the smooth Chad. I said, here's the features that I like about each one of these. Can we combine these and mesh these in one bait? And we ended up with, I did gather baits for this, but we ended up with that right there.
Dang.
So This has features from each bait. That's what's funny about this bait. Some people are like, "Oh, it's it's a little bit different than a Chad, but it's this." That's because it's a combination, which a lot of people don't know. A lot of people have never gotten that depth. That's why I'm saying KGB tells all. Like a lot of people don't know that this is actually a combination of the textured Chad and then the smooth Chad. There were features I liked about both, and I was able to combine them both into this bait.
Okay, so do you remember the first proto they'd sent you and kind of what you were expecting, and then once you got it in your hands, kind of what your first impressions were?
Yeah, I was blown away.
Yeah.
Got it out of they still send me prototypes and stuff in bubble wrap or in paper, like wrapped up or in a Ziploc bag. Like that's what the prototype. They don't come in packaging.
Yeah.
Prototypes come very crude, like
Yeah.
your lunch sack, pretty much wadded up around a bait
Yeah.
in a.
There we go.
There we go. Okay, cool.
We had you were talking about they pack it like a lunch sack, like it's just all
It's
bubble
almost
wrap
like
and everything.
sometimes it's like a lunch sack. It's like whatever they have on hand nearby. That's no diss to them. It's just funny that like you're talking about some serious. To me, like this should be sent like under in a security truck.
In a Pelican, in a Pelican in a truck.
Yeah, and here I am receiving it like wrapped up in paper, which is really cool. That's like it's super genuine when I get these things. It's neat. But yeah, I received the first bait and it was super cool because I was holding a Chad that I didn't have to make.
Right.
Clear differences. It was clear ABS, but it was just so shocking seeing like, oh my gosh, this is a reality. This is about to happen. And I still have all the first prototypes.
Oh, that's sweet.
And the first, except for the ones I had to send back, because what happened, I told them, I said, send me multiple prototypes. That way I can make adjustments and tweaks as needed and send it back and hopefully shorten the trial and error.
Your R&D. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the first ones they sent me was pretty much what everybody knows as the Spro Chad. The gap was a little bit off and it didn't have any scale detail.
Oh. And
I had to put the tail in it. There was no slot for the tail. That wasn't refined yet. But basically the shape was there. And it was really cool. They actually had printed imaging, which one of them was just stunning. Like the printed imaging on it was a threadfin shad. Like we can't, I'm sure they can replicate it, but it was just stunning. Like I can't replicate how beautiful that bait is. Let me see. They sent me 4. 2 of them swam like crap. One of them was okay, and the other one I was able to like fine tune and perfect. They got the sink rate right on 2. Basically, I ended up with one that was like actually good, and that's because I had to go back. Like I had to make tweaks to it. I ended up like torching some of the material and pressing it further into the ABS and getting the angles just right and all that stuff. And I had to figure out a new way to modify an ABS bait without destroying it.
And without it taking water in and stuff.
Exactly. And that way I could finish testing it and tuning it. And then I took a mic and like measured out like, hey, this is the adjustment I made. Had to draw it out on paper, like real simple stuff, and send it with them, with the bait back. And then they send back another sample. And we're talking like it might be 2 to 3 months.
Yeah.
Sorry. Might be 2 to 3 months, and then I would randomly get another sample back and test it. What's funny about the Chad, we only had to do that like a few times. It was not bad.
Yeah.
And then the scale detail, like literally, I drew it down. I drew the scale detail on a piece of paper. I'm not super good with technology. Like I can figure out how to run a website. I think this is my 3rd time Zooming, and I had to ask you some questions. But I do remember back in school how we could scan stuff into a computer and like get it, modify it and change it. I forget which program. It's like Windows 2 or something like that. Like it was old school stuff.
Yeah.
So I went back and like had to re-scratch my brain on technology. I've always been a hands-on, like, I got calluses. I don't do computer stuff. And so figured out how to perfect those scale details, like the scales, and make them actually line up to where they would continue lining up. And then printed that off and sent that to them. And that's the scale pattern that's on these baits.
Okay.
Like it's exactly what I came up with.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. It's not just a generic, across.
Mhm.
It's actually got some curvature in there and stuff like that. But it's really cool to seeing like, hey, here's this on paper, and then it comes back and it's like a reality.
On a form, yeah, on a 3D
Yeah.
form.
And then after talking and getting to know guys in the industry, like there's a lot of baits that are literally drawn up on like a napkin at a diner.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Had a
that's how
good
they
idea.
start.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's sometimes how they finish. Like, a lot of guys who design baits, you have the designer who designs it in the CAD program and all that stuff, but the guy who actually thinks of it
Mhm.
may not actually be able to make that,
Yeah.
but they know how to draw it
Mhm.
or chicken scratch
Brainstorm
it.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, how to chicken scratch it. And there's so many baits in the industry that start on like a napkin.
Mhm.
And it's just like that's how it's really really is that way. I'm working on a project now that I'm literally drawing out stuff and like mailing it to them on a
Yeah.
piece of paper. And
Right.
it's part of it is language barrier. Like a drawing,
Mhm.
there is no language barrier.
Yeah.
If you try to explain that to them or tell them or text it to them or email them, like there's a huge language barrier on where these are built. Like we've got designers in Japan, they're built in China. Like there's so many different
Mhm.
people involved. A picture is black and white.
Yeah.
You draw it down and there's and draw like arrows,
Mhm.
like you break it down to elementary stuff to where anybody can understand it. And it's almost hard doing that when you're talking about such intricate stuff.
Right.
But if you can figure out a way to do that, you can that's how this whole process works. And it's
Yeah.
really funny how it's all come about and how simple it is and how complex it is to get your foot in the door and all that. I mean, it's just
Yeah. Did you get to give them a couple colors? Like, did you pick what colors that they came in, or did you kind of say like, hey, I want to cover like the bases, and then they came up with the colors, the bone, perch, shad, and everything else?
yeah, no, I actually did those colors myself.
Oh,
They
so
sent me
did
blank. Yeah,
okay,
so they sent me blanks, and I got to paint them, and then
that's sweet.
they sent them back, and I knew on the colors like not all of them are home runs, like for
Mhm.
everybody. I knew that doing this, I had to do something that the factory could reproduce a whole bunch of times, not be overly complex, not
Yeah.
be taxidermy quality. Um, and now I've learned more. The factories can do some pretty incredible stuff. I've got one here that is actually
Wow.
so that's from Spro. This
Whoa.
color is not available yet. It will. This color is actually going to be available, and this is you're the first person to ever see this like publicly.
Dang, dude. That's like got depth to it and everything.
Yeah, scale
Like
tipping. Now, like the scales
mirrored to
don't
the
completely
scales.
line up, but it completely lines up with what I painted.
Yeah.
Um, so I painted this bait, sent it to them. They sent it back, and it matches exactly what I painted. And this is actually going to be available at the Bassmaster Classic. So little pitch there. So
Couple weeks from now. Wow,
yeah, just
dude.
a couple
Like
of weeks from now.
you held that up and like you can't even tell that went through a printer, the process
No,
that's
this
not an airbrush.
no, this is all airbrushed.
Oh, okay. But
No,
still, wow.
that makes it even more impressive. This is
Yeah.
all airbrushed. This is
Yeah.
not printed. Like it's cool. So talking about the colors, yes, I picked the colors. I wish I knew now, like then what I know now. I
Yeah.
wish
Yeah.
that I would have gone a little bit more into detail, but I knew I had to just get good solid colors that work anywhere across the country. And so that's where we came up with the 5 baits. I knew I had to have a trout for the West Coast guys, and it being a swim bait, we have to have a trout.
Hmm.
Bone was my all-time favorite.
Yep.
We did gizzard, which inadvertently this for me this was a herring, and they got the sample and thought it looked more like a gizzard, and so we named this one gizzard. Even though I felt like it was a herring, I had to take all right, cool. I'm trusting you guys on this.
Yeah.
And then threadfin, which everybody thinks is a trout, because it's a little bit blotchy. But in the threadfin, if once you get underwater, like if you're just sitting here, if you're one of the guys who are going to sit here and judge a bait just by sitting on your couch,
Right.
yeah, it has some blotches and it looks like a trout. But if you actually put the bait in the water and see
Mhm.
what it does in the water, you'll be like, holy crap, that's a threadfin. So I
Yeah.
paint baits to react underwater, not sitting on the couch
Hmm.
during the wintertime.
Yeah.
So yeah, I developed every single one of these patterns. And what's funny about that is when I sent them to them, I painted bait. They sent me some blanks. I painted them, sent them to them. It was like less than 3 weeks. They sent them back.
Wow.
And I was actually frustrated. I got the same package back, like same packaging. The only difference was those baits were in now for the first time ever. This is the first time I got to see them in a Spro package.
In like a clamshell package.
Yeah, and up until this point, they were still like individually bubble wrapped.
Uh-huh.
And so now it's like I pull these out of the box. I'm like, oh, cool. Like that's some cool. Like I finally get to see it in packaging.
Yeah.
And for me, that's like super humbling because we send ours in crinkle paper and bubble wrap still,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
our handmade ones that are 3 times the price.
Yeah.
So it's the first time I see them in clamshell packaging, and then I get to look at them. Actually, my initial reaction was I was pissed off. Not gonna lie, I was like, "What, dude? They're wasting my time." I'm like, they just sent the same baits back in packaging, and it was actually the bone color that I first noticed. I threw it down on the table. And I was like, "What the heck?" And I sit there and looked at it, and I realized it had the Spro logo on the back.
And you're like, wait a minute.
Wait, I didn't do that.
Yeah.
And then I looked at another one. It had Spro logo, and another one. Then I pulled one out
They
of the
pulled out of the
package.
package.
And I was like, oh my God, they matched my paint to the T.
Like I thought they were my
thought
baits.
I
Yeah.
thought it was the bait that I had painted, that I had airbrushed. That's whenever, and by that time, the colors, like we were needing to move.
Mm-hmm.
The colors were already ironed out. That's what we were doing. And whenever I realized that they could match it to the T, that's when I realized what their capabilities were. And that's when I realized we could do stuff, like this.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
And there is another color, just another little dab. There's another color. It's a bluegill. I don't have it here with me. It's at my house, but it's going to be available at the show out in California.
Okay.
At the Pacific. What is it? The Pacific show.
Yeah, is that the one that was the Fred Hall show or whatever it was, and they switched it or changed names or whatever it was?
Yep. And so that bluegill, we've got 5,000 of each. Mm-hmm. The bluegill is going to be available out there. If they don't sell out, they may bring some to the Bassmaster Classic, but they're thinking they're going to sell out there. And then the Bassmaster Classic for this one, which is, we're calling it the Grand Lake Gizzard.
Okay.
Because it's there on Grand Lake.
Yeah, yeah.
That one, we got 5,000 of those. And what's cool, here's something that's cool about the Grand Lake Gizzard. They did not do this on the bluegill. They did do it on this one. They're actually individually numbered on the SKU.
Oh, that is sweet.
1 through 5,000.
1 through 5,000.
Yep. Dang. So 5,000 is a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, I mean, these are sold worldwide. Like 5,000, Yeah. So somebody's going to get that number one. Even the one that I have didn't have the number one on the package. Like I've got, they sent me one back to verify and confirm, and that's the way this whole thing works.
Yeah.
They send something to me, and either I have the final say on whether that passes or not.
Yep.
And even the one I have doesn't have that, so that's going to be really cool. I wish I could find number one. That'd be something pretty cool to have, at least for me.
Yeah.
Maybe they set it aside for me. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. When I show up, if he hands me a package, I'll be like, sweet. I still get excited when I get a package from him.
Man, that's awesome. What was it? I mean, so it's pretty surreal feeling for you, obviously, to see the packaging and stuff. How many messages did you get once they went live of people walking in Bass Pros or Cabela's or just tackle shops and sending you a picture like, hey man, like they're here? Like that had to have been probably a pretty crazy feeling.
It was really, really cool. One of the first that I got was actually my mom had sent me a picture of my grandparents holding one. And I was never like super close to my grandparents growing up. Not on her side. And unfortunately, I wish I was. It just kind of wasn't that way. I was never super close to them. Mm-hmm. But I got a picture of them. Like they took time, even though I didn't feel super close, they took their time to go to a Bass Pro Shops, and they're older. They're in their 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
They take their time to go to a Bass Pro Shops, ask and see if they have a bait. And then they took a picture holding my bait. And it was like, oh my gosh, that is so cool.
Yeah.
That was one of the first pictures I got. It took a while for the initial rollout, and that was just, again, due to COVID. We announced these baits at ICAST, thought we would have them within a month or two. And then, straight up the factory, they got into a nice PG way to say it. They got into a pissing match with their government. And you don't get into a pissing match with the Chinese government. Yeah, I'm sorry, these are made in China. Like, I'm not going to deny that.
No, yeah.
We still have the American handmade stuff. So, but yeah, they get into a pissing match with the Chinese government, and that factory got shut down. So we had received a very small number. I think it was like 800 baits.
Wow.
That we got from them, and then the factory got shut down. And so then the owner had to go, and the owner of the factory, which Spro has really good relationships with, there was nothing wrong with the relationship and how all this works out. It was just simply that it was a zoning issue is what it ended
Yeah.
up being. This factory popped up, and then a bunch of houses popped up around it. And then all of a sudden, after the houses popped up, they said, "Hey, this is a residential area. Turns out this is residential. You have to shut down." And they, the factory's like, "No, we were here first. We're going to keep rolling." Yeah, I guess you can't do that.
So you guys don't have
So
a factory anymore.
exactly. So luckily, the owner had another factory that was actually still in production. They had to pretty much move everything,
Move all
which
the machines.
that was the delay.
Mm.
That was why we took, Tackle Warehouse caught a lot of heat for it. Spro caught a lot of heat for it. There was a lot of heat because people had placed orders and then they're waiting months.
Yeah.
And they're like, what was the point of that? What's the point of that, KGB? And it's like, we can't get base through you and we can't get them through Spro. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And that's what happened. That's why there was a big delay.
Mm.
Now, once they got the ball rolling, we've not skipped a beat since. There's just bait after bait. You can walk into almost any tackle store and find these now. They may not have a huge selection of them. They may, pick their colors that work for them, and they still like to sell out. Like, there's still tackle stores this day, even some of my local ones. Like, if they make a post, they're gone. They're out of stock. And so tackle stores have learned, hey, we want customers coming through these doors.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we want people coming in to buy these. We don't want to mail them all out. So now, like, you walk into a tackle store, there might be 15 or 20, or there's still tackle stores that'll advertise and they sell out in a flash. It's just kind of a weird market. Like, it's really cool to see how well they've done.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you noticed, but earlier I was writing down like a question, and we were talking about the flippers actually, and that's kind of what brought it up. So the ABS stuff is super cool. Did that ever worry you that it might turn people off to spending the extra money for the resin bait?
Yeah, 100%. It was a gamble from the get-go. I was very I was worried that it would cannibalize my own market, like my own, I led with my most popular bait. I told Spro, if we're going to do this, I'm going to do it right. I'm going to do the best one that I have. I'm not going to come in and give you some crap. Like, we're all in. And so that was a gamble I had to take. And I was worried about it. It has not slowed down the resin market, not even an ounce. If anything, it's brought more customers.
That's what I was going to say.
To the table, and I think it's such a beneficial and mutual, like, it's a mutually beneficial relationship for us and Spro to work together, at least on the swim baits, because like the more customers I bring them, the more customers I get. The more customers I get, the more I'm turning on to them. Yeah. And it's just like watching this thing, just stair step up and up and up. It's like, where is the ceiling on this? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like somebody buys one and they just, slaughter fish on it, and they're like, "Oh man, like what's this resin one capable of, or what can I do with this resin one?" Or that's their first swim bait they've ever bought, and they're like, "Oh, like there's a resin version, like, build up the confidence for a couple months. I'm going to spend, double the amount, and I'm going to buy a resin one," and they're blown out of the water. Right. Like, "Oh my gosh." But then they kind of just have a little bit of everything. I mean, it's got to be getting people into swim bait fishing, and also, like you said, in turn, bringing more people to the resin side of things too.
Right. But I feel like, and this is not a pat on my shoulder. I hope like anybody watches this, or any company moving forward who tries to take this approach or does do this approach, you've got to do it right. You can easily throw anything out there in the ABS world and still make your own version of it. But if you don't do it right, if you don't have a product that actually performs, and I'm not just saying, I'm not trying to pat myself on the shoulder or anything, like the reason it's so successful is because this is a good bait. It's truly a good bait. Like, there's nothing lacking on this for what it is. For an ABS bait, there's nothing lacking. I held nothing back from this. And that's, I'm an experienced builder. That's why we ended up with a good bait. There's other baits who, the advertisement goes really well. They look good. They're good at their marketing. They're good at their videos, and they're not doing what this bait is doing, like sales wise or performance wise. I'm not going to name names. I mean, shoot, you could probably pull one out of a hat. Just, you've got to do it right to begin with. I don't, I'm trying to find the right words to say it other than you got to get it right.
Yeah.
If this bait was not successful, if this bait did not perform, that would have tarnished my name. That
Yeah.
would have tarnished my brand, my reputation, my name. Vice versa. If I didn't have, this bait right, then this one wouldn't do well. So for them to both like still live and harmonic, like, and do well,
Yeah.
they both got to be right. And you've seen examples of glide baits, of swim baits, of other baits that come in and either, look at ICAST last year. What was it plagued with?
Yeah.
Knockoffs. The only thing everybody remembers for 2023 ICAST is that was the year of a knockoff.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never seen one of those baits in the water. I'm curious about it because I want to see what everybody's complaining about.
Right.
They didn't do it right.
Mm-hmm.
It's that simple. Had they partnered with the same company, that could have exploded. They could have built off of what Spro was known for.
Mm-hmm.
That was a great opportunity for them to build off of. I feel like when we introduced this bait at ICAST, we're not the first to do it. We're not the first ones to do a partnership or anything like that, but it gained a lot of traction. It gained a lot of attention. 23 would have been a great year to build off that and do it again, and it didn't happen. Instead, it was the opposite. It's like, wow, what a knockoff.
Mm-hmm.
So I really hope for 24 to see it come back to whether it's me or somebody else. Maybe, it could be anybody out there who's sitting in the garage building baits. I hope somebody can build off that because that is what I feel like is going to actually improve the industry. Somebody sitting in the garage, innovative, or just perfecting. They don't even have to be innovative as long as you just do it really well.
Yeah.
Then hopefully they can bring that, to the industry.
Yeah.
Me or anybody. Yeah. I don't care.
Just a off question. I didn't even have it written down. Is there anybody that you see in the scene that's like pushing the envelope to kind of push the maybe new style baits or maybe even reinventing the wheel? Have you noticed anything that kind of catches your eye in the market?
There's some stuff coming out. I forget the name. Jeez, I forget his name. I'm horrible with the names, so forgive me on that.
Yeah,
but it's the clear Alabama rig. You too. Good. I'm not alone.
It's Stealth Lures. What is his name?
Yeah. So he's been messing with that thing. I think that thing's really cool. That's innovative. There's nothing. Here's the thing. There's nothing new to be left in fishing anymore. There's truly not. Glide baits were actually a thing back when Perry caught the world record bass.
Yeah.
That technically was a single jointed bait. There's not a whole lot left to be innovative, but there is a lot to perfecting what's been done. And I think he's taken the Alabama rig and perfected it and done something that's not been done and just made it clear and less visually absurd. I don't know what else to say. He's made it better. And it's really, it's a clear Alabama rig. That's cool. Is it super innovative? No. We have clear bills instead of metal bills. We've done clear stuff before in the fishing industry. It's not a first. It's not the first person to make something clear. Somebody at one point in time went from using, horsehair to, making clear fishing line. Like it's not the first time something went from being seen to clear.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's really cool to see it in such a popular category. Mm-hmm. So as far as innovation, like, man, even myself, like I struggle with that. Like, I don't want to say I'm innovative.
Yeah.
I'm a perfectionist in what I do.
Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't invent glide baits.
Yeah.
Will my name, or at least my initials, always be tied to them? I hope so. Mm-hmm. Right now it seems so.
Right.
But I didn't invent glide baits.
Mm-hmm.
I just found my little niche and did what I like to do with them.
Yeah. What have you seen any of the footage behind the sock bait that DRT's working on?
That actually kind of would be innovative. Never mind. There is some innovation left. Yeah, that thing looks really cool for what it is. Yeah, it's going to catch flack for being a sock. Everybody's at some point drug their hook through some slime and had that giant slime back there, or some weeds or something like that. And that's essentially what that bait is, but they're doing it right. That's what I'm talking about, doing it right. As long as they do something and do it right and perform, Like, I'm all about performance. If it performs and if it catches fish, you're doing it right. That's why we fish.
Yeah.
They're doing it right, it looks like.
Yeah. The story behind it is they went to a yard sale and they saw like a big windsock, and it was a fish like printed onto it. And so they bought it and they casted it, and like a couple casts, there was like a 20-pound fish that followed it up. And that was like the birth idea of that idea. And they've been working on it for like 5 years now.
It started as a joke, and then they're like,
Yeah, yeah.
oh my
And then
gosh.
they're like, oh my gosh, like this looks like a fish under there. Like it's totally reactive to the water. So that's kind of where it is now. But
There is some innovation left. Thank you for correcting me on that.
no,
But
that was like
because that is like,
I was wondering if you were gonna say it, or maybe I mean you are a business owner who like you said is constantly working on stuff. So I was like, maybe he's only heard of it. Maybe he hasn't seen it. Maybe he's gonna be like, what are you talking about, sock bait? So I just wanted to see if you were familiar with it.
well, there's stuff that like I feel like I'm working on that is somewhat innovative. It's just kind of
Mhm.
it's reinventing a wheel that's already perfect. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
So as much as I want to claim to be innovative and all that stuff, like I feel like if anybody puts that title on themselves, that you better be doing something.
yeah,
You better be doing something that's like real. That's real, an actual game changer. I mean, we've thrown that term around for so long. Um, if somebody's, if there's innovation left, and it's sad to think that in the fishing industry, it's just like fishing's been around since mankind has existed.
right.
Um, I hate to like crush anybody's hopes on innovation, but like everything at some point has ever been, has been made weedless. There's been weed, like, you know, there. It's really mind blowing. If anybody does any history and research, you realize how like all we're doing is recycling some stuff and making it look pretty. Like we have technology now to make it look better
Yeah, yep.
and to make it perform better. But like locally, there's a museum up in Branson, Missouri. It's about an hour and a half from here, and there's a fishing museum in there, and they have a whole history. Like it's a museum of old antique fishing stuff.
Mhm.
And the good thing is, this isn't like your mom and pop museum. Like this is put on, I think, by Johnny Morris.
Oh,
Like
okay.
Bass Pro Shop, I think,
Yep.
is behind it to some degree. They're in, they almost have to be. They're in the
Partnership or
same region.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, but they have like one of each bait. They don't have like, oh, I have 50 of these. It's not your
Mhm.
mom and pop who likes to collect things. They have like one of everything that's ever existed, and like jointed fish go back well back in the early 1900s,
Mhm.
like early 1900s.
Yeah.
Um, and some of them have one joint. Do we consider that a glide bait? Some of them are big, some are small. There's frogs, hard frog. I got really popular for that bullfrog that I did.
Yeah.
There were frogs back then, even big bullfrogs back then. It's amazing to look at the history and realize like it's a little bit squashing at some
Mhm.
point for a dream. Like if you're a dreamer, I'm a dreamer.
Yeah.
It's very humbling to walk in there and be like, dang, like
Somebody did that
you
73
walk
years
in like, oh,
ago.
I'm gonna come out and I'm gonna make something never seen before.
Yeah.
And then you walk out and you're just like shoulder slump, like, man, everything's been done.
Yeah.
Like, so to use that word innovation, like that's to me, that's a big title to hold.
It's a lot of weight. Yeah.
Yeah, and even I don't like to say that I'm trying to be innovative.
Mhm.
Um, I'm trying to just perfect my craft.
Mhm.
That's if everybody just focuses on that, then man, we have some incredible fishing lures.
Yeah. Yeah. I think innovative now almost is like if you can make something as user friendly as possible. If you can make a bait that you is super easy to tune, or maybe doesn't even need to be tuned, like the ABS baits that have the internal weighting system where you don't have to worry about fish knocking out lead or screwing up tails, or just whatever it may be like that. I feel like if you can make a more efficient lure that is pretty close to the word ingenuity, or I can't even remember the word, but that
Yeah,
closer.
innovative.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
innovative. That's the closest thing that I can think of is making just stuff more efficient at catching fish and
right,
longevity of a lure.
right. And I'm not trying to change anybody else's perspective. This is just my feelings on it. Like, you know, innovative's a heavy word to use, and there are some out there. When you talk about intricate, like if you talk about the internals of baits,
Yeah,
there's some innovation still going on. Mike Gilbert's doing some innovative stuff
yeah.
for how the outside shape. He's building a shad with a paddle tail.
Mhm.
The internals, or a trout with a paddle tail. The internals are really there's some cool stuff going on there. So there is still some. I don't want to squash the innovation for people. I don't want to. I'm not here to crush dreams. There's still some innovation left. But it's more on how they're built, the intricacies of it. There's still intricacies. There's still room for innovation on the intricacy and the little fine detail parts, or making them user friendly, stuff like that. So I'm not here to just crush dreams. There is still some innovation left to be had. I think he's very innovative, and like he's got some stuff figured out in his head that I can only imagine. Like if you could, pull a little string out of his head, out of Mike Buca's head. If you could pull just a little tiny piece out of all their head and like mesh it all together, what you would come up with, it'd be incredible.
Yeah.
Because all of us have something in our head that we just don't know, that hasn't become a reality yet.
Yeah. Speaking of having in your head, did you ever have an idea to ever make an ABS bait prior to that phone call that led to it all?
Yeah. I had dreams this way early on, back when I carved that first wooden bluegill. I just didn't know how to make it happen. I'd actually reached out. I carved a wooden bluegill that was still just like super rough shape, and I was already reaching out to a local manufacturer, a local ABS plant. Like, hey, let's do something. Didn't realize the molds were 10,000 plus for the first one, and so that crushed that. I did reach out.
That's a lot of trucks of firewood to sell.
Yeah, and I did reach out to companies like. I'd reached out to Savage Gear and stuff like around the time of the Bullfrog. Like it gained so much popularity. I was reaching out like, hey, let's this is something like this has gained a lot of traction, like worldwide attention. Let's do something. Never heard anything back. I was that guy making phone calls trying. And eventually I was like, you know what? Put the phone down and get to work. And eventually, hopefully, I always had the hope that somebody would notice. And I never thought it would come across as a phone call looking for materials.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I always hoped that. I mean, when I was a kid, I said I was into fishing, like not heavily, but I always, I was heavy into the idea of fishing, but I was only fishing farm ponds and stuff. I had that perfected. Like I had that dialed. I would go to the store and like, my parents would drop me off at Walmart, which is, that was big in my childhood as Walmart. And so, they'd go get groceries. They knew where to find me. I wasn't at the toys. I wasn't in the, electronics. I was in the fishing department. They knew exactly where to find me. I'd be in that fishing aisle and I'd be looking at every bait, every package. And I would see, Kevin Van Dam, all the names and all the faces. And I think that maybe I wanted to be that guy at one point. At one point I had dreams of being a professional fisherman when I was fishing farm ponds. I hadn't even been fishing lakes, If I was fishing lakes, it was off the pontoon, the pontoon that we had to spray carb cleaner in to get it started. And then if it started, we'd go out as a family and pull the inner tube. And I was just wanting to fish the whole time. That was my lake fishing experience. Was when the boat broke down, I got to fish.
Yeah,
so
right.
that was my lake fishing experience. And still at that time, I was fishing farm pond. I was heavy into fishing, I'm not going to lie. But it really, already talked about, I went full throttle once I hit high school and was able to drive and actually go fishing by myself and do what I wanted to do.
Right. So the other thing that you do is you do have a rod, the KGB rod out, and you had that before Spro and everything. Was that kind of, how did that come to be? Was there just kind of a hole in the market and you wanted your own tool out there to sling your own bait?
Not the hole in the market. It was, again, kind of driven by necessity and needs. This is same time that I was starting to build swim baits and I didn't have that swim bait gear and I was refusing to accept technology and order something online. I was just lucky enough to have a local manufacturer. Like there's only, at the time there were 5. Now there's only, I think 3 rod manufacturers in the United States. And one of them was in my tiny little hometown.
Yeah.
That they actually make the blanks and everything. I'm not talking about like your rod guy who orders blanks and
builds it himself.
Calls himself a rod builder. I mean, he is a rod builder. He's a guide winder. Sorry.
Yeah.
This place actually makes the blanks and everything. And so they had a little tackle store and I went in and kind of told them my thing, like, hey, I need a custom rod. Can you guys do it? And I think they felt sorry for me. So they did it and then built a relationship and, came back again. They're like, oh my God, this guy's back. And then just kept coming back. And yeah, I want another one. I want another one, but can you do it like this? And I think at the time he was just taking blanks that he already had. And
Yeah.
like, he wasn't making a special blank for me.
Hmm.
Um, and then he knew I started getting serious. So he'd make a special blank for me.
Like he'd roll one for you.
Right. And so KGB had just started kind of gaining traction.
Hmm.
And I knew rods was like, if I could offer baits and the rod to match, that solves the problem.
Hmm.
Like, people, here you
Don't
go.
need to ask. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I had saved up, and right when I was ready to place a big order, like an actual order for rods,
Hmm.
they shut down. And this is pre-COVID. This had
Wow.
nothing to do with COVID.
Yeah.
The factory shut down, and so I was like, "Crap!" And so I saved all my old rods. Like, I put some up on, up on the wall. Some of my favorites, even though I hated to, they're, I'm like, "Crap! I'm not going to be able to get these again."
Yeah.
Maybe someday, like, I can have this as an example. And so then KGB Swimbaits starts taking off, really doing well. This is when I started hiring the firefighters and stuff.
Mhm.
And I just, one day out of the blue, I was like, man, I wonder if they're up and going again. Like, or if somebody's bought that or whatever. I was
Yeah.
actually trying to talk to a buddy, Eric, actually has friends with some higher names in the industry. And I actually talked to him and I was like, dude, your friends should buy this
Yeah.
plant. Like, it would be a good move. And I'm like, I don't know if anybody owns it yet or not. So I started doing research and just randomly, like, I looked on Facebook who, like, tried I tried Googling it, tried everything I could to find out, like, who owns this plant now, if anybody does.
Yeah.
I found one phone number, no name attached to anything. There was one phone number, and I called it. And this guy goes, "Hello, yeah, did you buy a manufacturing plant for fishing rods?" And he's like, "Oh, and he kicked into
Professional.
business gear.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, actually, yes, we did. Starts talking. Anyways, fast forward a few months. He had heard of who I told him who I was. And he's like, oh, actually, we saw your name we bought the plant. We saw your file
Mhm.
of the rods you were working on. And we were really excited because we know who you are. And I was like, okay,
Wow.
cool. Well, who are you? And so we started communicating and talking. I took one of those off the wall, like my favorite rod, took it off the wall, brought it to the plant, and said, here, replicate this.
Yeah.
And that rod it was probably 7 years old at this point. It was super bendy. Like, it is,
Broken in.
oh, yeah, it's really broken, but it's become my favorite rod. And I
Mhm.
didn't realize that I'd gone down the rabbit hole of parabolic rods.
Yeah.
Uh, Thing was super parabolic. And I said, this is my favorite one. Can you guys see if you can replicate it? Like, new owners, they were able to get back some of the employees, after being shut down for 2, 3, 4 years.
Mhm.
Employees have found other jobs. They were able to actually get a bunch of those employees to come back.
Wow.
Those employees loved that job so much they actually quit what they were doing and came back under this
Wow.
new ownership. And so the employers like, yeah, we remember how to do this. Like, we remember how to run this place.
Mhm.
And I'm talking small. You're talking 25 employees. That's
Wow.
what this business is. And they turn out thousands of rods. Like, their manufacturing process is different than mine.
Mhm.
So it doesn't take a handful to get the ball rolling again.
Mhm.
And so we started doing prototypes and all that stuff. And he ended up with, let's see, this is the extra heavy. And I've got to be careful because this one is actually going to go to Tackle Warehouse this week. But end up with the extra heavy, super long handle. The reason I did that, I was striper fishing heavily at the time, and my wrists were being wore out. Like, I had to take a 6 month break from fishing striper because my wrists were being worn out.
Mhm.
Fishing heavy current, like all that stuff. I wanted that rod to be tucked up my
Tucked.
armpit to take
Yeah.
off that leverage,
Mhm.
and for the casting of heavy baits. That's where we end up with the super long handle. Some people are not so comfortable with that. I do
Oh.
have a solution coming. Can't talk too much about it yet, but I have a solution for that coming. But ended up with a really good parabolic rod that just loads up, does the work for you, takes the torque off your wrist. And we got the heavy and the extra heavy, both for the baits designed. The extra heavy is for like the Legend, the 9-inch baits and bigger.
Mhm.
It can throw the 7-inch just fine. And then the heavy is for the 7-inch and under. You can almost use it, even for jigs and stuff like that. But yeah, ended up developing the rods and absolutely love them. We've sold, from the time I've introduced the rods till now, I think we sold around 3,000 of them, which is actually pretty good.
Yeah.
we've sold way more baits, but most guys, they might buy 1 or 2 rods a year. If that, they might go 1 or 2 years before they buy a rod.
Yeah.
But they're definitely buying baits. You're going to buy multiple baits a year compared to rods. So for the numbers of rods that we've done really well.
Yeah. Wow. That's really good.
Yeah. And right now, I actually pulled them from the website. There were some people, there was a rumor that got out that if you bought a rod, if you place a rod in your cart, you'll guaranteed get your bait. Like it won't let you.
Yeah.
That's not true. And like, for example, one drop of baits that we did, I think I refunded 14 or 15 rods. And there's so much like, I want to be able to print off my Excel sheet or download my files and be able to print labels.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to go back and then refund rods and all that. It throws numbers off. And that was just one. People started doing this like very frequently where they were buying rods and then expecting me to refund them. It's like, that takes time out of my day.
Yeah.
I'm still a human. This isn't automated by any means.
Yeah.
And then it throws off bookkeeping for taxes and all that stuff. And it was just like, all right, cool. Rods off the website, tackle warehouse, here you go. So right now, unless a mom and pop shop just wants a few, all of our KGB rods are exclusive through tackle warehouse. So same price. I lose a little bit doing that, but it's not worth it. It's worth the headache of not having to.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, you don't have to worry about driving tubes to UPS or USPS or whatever and dropping them off or whatever. That's totally out of your wheelhouse at that point in time.
Yeah. I mean, we were doing it for a long time, but I got tired of having, a whole stack of 20-foot sections of PVC pipe in here and going and cutting an 8-foot section every time somebody wears a rod. And, if you get it wrong, then you're snapping tips and all that stuff. And this kind of, tackle warehouse has that dialed on shipping rods. They're going to have some broke, inevitably, but, they've got it dialed. That's what they do. They won't hopefully have the headache that I had of refunds because of a drop,
Yeah.
And they're a good partnership to work with.
Heck yeah, man. Last thing I got for you, can we run through a list of baits you guys offer or have offered, and then kind of how your drops work? Do you guys drop a couple baits throughout the year, a couple different batches of baits, or is it usually like mostly chads and you'll sprinkle in some, some crappies or however through the year?
I listen to demand and follow seasonal trends. It's that simple. People are shouting for Chad. We're going to make them.
Yeah.
It might take us a month or so. Like we try to run production, like what we produced all of January, you guys are now seeing the results of. It takes, a month or two to get everything back from paint and sold. And so I kind of have to be a little bit ahead of it, or there's a lag time. If people are like, hey, like we're wanting crappie. And if I don't have any crappie in the works, it'll be a month or two before they actually see those crappie. So kind of have to kind of predict and be in the seasonal. So like, starting last month and this month, we're focusing on crappie for the trend of spring is coming. And people, that's when bass are, that's when crappie are spawning. Bass are up there eating crappie. People are more likely to be buying crappie baits. So yeah, I mean, that's, I listen to the trends, but I also know the seasonal stuff too. That's how we judge what we make. And it's a little bit of a gamble. Like, for if you pour baits for a solid month, but then the next month, that isn't what the trending bait is. It's like, dang, now it's going to be a struggling month. So you just got to nail it right. And for consistency's sake, we can't just switch production like that.
Right.
I wish we could pour crappie, chat, and legends and kings and all that stuff all at once, but man, our consistency would be all over the map. Our sweet spot is like the first half a day of pouring a certain model of bait is kind of like a grind.
Getting back into it.
Then you get into a rhythm. And then if you stay in that rhythm, let's stay in that rhythm for the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So we'll build up a surplus of heads and tails. And then for the next couple of weeks, it's assembling, or putting them together. And guys are assembling from day one, like from the first ones that leave, I don't know. It's just a process.
Yeah. Everybody's got their place.
Yeah. The baits that we do have that we've run through, this is one that is going to be coming. It's not out yet, but it is going to be coming. It's the little bitty guy.
Ooh.
So I actually lost the pin for this one, so I can't really show you the joint action. It's somewhere either in the floor or in the tub, but and it takes a different size pin. They're out there, so I don't want to take time to go cut a new one. But yeah, little bitty guy. So this one is coming. But as far as baits that are actually out and available, we've got the 7-inch Chad. Sorry, I'm not used to this camera. I feel like it's opposite. We've got the 7-inch Chad, which is probably the quickest selling bait I have.
Yeah.
And then we work our way up to the 9-inch Legend. And through the years, like you're going to see OG Chad. You're going to see some that were called, TSG. I just went back to the names as far as we moved back away from TSG back to Chad and Legend.
Yep.
And there are multiple models of each. Every couple of years, I'll revisit and like, something on my mind that I want to change and perfect, but it's not enough to categorize it as a new bait. Okay, we're going to update this. It's a new model, essentially. So there's lots of different versions of the Chad, but this is the current. And for me, I don't ever like to slide backwards. So this is my newest, most up to date, my proudest work.
Yeah.
I feel like each time we get better and better. So this is Chad Legend. Staying in the shad category, the next size up would be the 11-inch King. Yeah, and that thing's, it's big. 11 inches, 9.8 ounces. This is a color that's coming. This one, there's a lot of people speaking very loudly about this bait. Everybody wants it. I used to produce the heck out of these. People would get them, realize how big they are, then sell them for like cheaper than I made them for. Right. Killed the market. Yeah, I've sold probably over 1,000 of these that are out there already. It's not a super rare bait to get. It's just super rare to find that people are actually going to throw, a 9-ounce bait.
Yeah, they sold good in Texas last year at Lake Fork. I know they sold pretty quick out there.
Yeah, and what's funny is like people are buying it up like it's a new bait that I actually made 5 years prior.
Yeah,
like this is an old bait that came back.
Yeah.
So the 11-inch Legend, there is the unicorn pounder. Bigger. None of these have really left circulation other than just gifted. And I don't know if these are going to go into production or not. We'll just have to see. But I have told the crew, I said, I want, as soon as we can, I want one of these leaving the shop every week, going out as a gift to somebody who has been like a big supporter for KGB Swimbaits. And I'm talking to guys who have been a fan since day one, or have gone out and shot like countless hours of footage, or brought us some kind of attention of some sort, caught a personal best, a double digit something. So my goal is, whenever we can start this, whether it's 2 weeks from now or 6 weeks from now, I want a pounder. Excuse me. I want a pounder leaving the shop every week, going to somebody we'll just pull up their address and send
it. As a thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. As a thank you. And we may do that for, 20 baits, 30 baits, 50 baits. I don't know. And, I just want to send them out as thank yous, because there's been a lot of like crazy good support and loyal people. I've never paid anybody for advertisement. I don't hardly give anything away. Like the pros who've thrown baits, I've never given a bait. Mike Iaconelli, last year was big on them. I never gave that guy a bait. He's never ordered a bait. He was getting them through friends who bought them. So, there's other pros, like people have represented our baits without me ever asking them to. And this is a simple way for me to give back.
Right.
So anyways, that's talking about the pounder. We do the crappie as well.
Oh yeah.
This is a production bait, very highly detailed production bait. This was a mix of I like to call it HD taxidermy. So there was originally a crappie that started this thing, but there was a ton. This is no longer just a crappie mold.
Right.
Like, way far from it. Went back and carved out each and every scale, changed the shape, changed the thickness, the profile. Like there's so many modifications. Really, the only existing part is that it's still looks like a crappie.
Yeah,
that mouth. There's been so many modifications.
The mouth looks so good.
Yeah, and even that, we cut and split that. It's a lot like a real crappie. It doesn't have that square of a mouth. It doesn't have that.
It's all rounded.
Yeah, so a lot of people can say, "Oh, I molded a crappie." Yes, I did for the initial basis, but after that was, hours and hours of work carving it and just sitting down, literally. with a magnifying glass. I took one on a stand and
Yeah.
sit there and carved with a Dremel, and even all the way down to a needle. Like would take a needle.
Great
I even
bait.
put a needle in a Dremel to try to help it carve, but they would just spin off and break.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of detail. So is it taxidermy? Yes. Did I cheat a little bit by doing a crappie? Yes. Is this still a crappie? Far from one as far as the resin version. I mean, they don't have a flat belly.
Yeah.
They don't have this profile. There's a lot. Anyways, just I guess going into some of the stuff on it, I have tried to mold a fish and make a fish swim. Not gonna lie. At some point, anybody who's done this long enough has tried that.
Yeah.
A fish profile does not want to swim for some reason. They got to have real muscles if they're going to. Something that might be coming, be a little carp. So that's another coming bait along with,
the little guy.
Yeah, little guy. I don't know what I'm going to call him. He may be dubbed the little guy. Let's see. Another thing.
Did you ever make that crappie 3-piece, or was that your own doing?
No, I've put out a handful out there.
Okay,
I know I saw one on Swimbait Universe just not too long ago that popped up, and I think I put 3 out there.
I've only ever seen 1 or 2.
Yeah, and there's a build. Like I'm no stranger to the build baits and stuff. I haven't found a way to produce them in a production setting yet that I'm comfortable with. But I've been using build baits for a long time. Deep cranks and divers and stuff like that for a long. My personal best striper is on one of my own Chad that I turned into a 3-piece and added a monster build to it. And that was well before like deep cranks became a thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was grinding the bottom on 20 feet. So this is something that's likely to come very soon.
Yep. I was about to say, I saw you post that, and Wayne posted it the other day.
Yeah. So my recent knee injury, like I was really close. I was hoping to have this winter, and my knee injury kind of stalled that for a couple months. Just because I can't get out and field test it like I need to.
Right.
But in the background, we have over the past couple of weeks, we've been testing in the shop and really trying to refine it in the shop. I've got a tank test out here in the shop, and we've got it even better. So I feel like whenever I can get out and field test this here in the next few weeks, I think it's going to be right.
Yeah.
So see, of course, Baby Benson. That's one that got a lot of it. A lot of people like that. For a lot of people, that's a unicorn. There's about 150 or 200 of these out there. They're just not feasible for my manufacturing. That's all it is. They're fantastic baits. They are not easy to produce. And then, all kinds of goodies that will never see the light of day.
Right. Yeah.
That I would like for like some major manufacturer to maybe pick up or something like that.
Yeah.
if I could ever find one. But yeah, like this, I've got a frog, like a baby frog.
Oh wow, yeah.
With
buzz bait or
and they spin opposite ways. So this thing swims. It's super fun, and it's top hook. Everybody's wanting a top hook. So super fun bait to throw. And I've got boxes and boxes of stuff like that.
Right. Dang, man. You guys have a huge box of blems, whether they just,
Yeah. If they don't pass, sometimes we can do, if it's of the same color, we can do like a head and tail swap. Like we'll pull the tail off another one and end up with 2 baits that perform well. And sometimes we get them to like magical baits that way. So we'll always try that. Like out of a batch of 200, if there's 3 or 4, we'll try the head tail swaps. We'll usually gain 1 or 2, and we're always left with 1 or 2 duds.
Right.
So what we've kind of started doing, it just eats through my saw blades.
Yeah.
We'll cut the head off and send it as a keychain.
Okay.
That's really cool for a customer, like for replacement. If I have to replace, say their bait is totally trashed, I'll cut its head off and send the original bait's head with a new bait back to them. Yeah. And it's like, that's a little memorabilia for them. They got its head as a keychain.
Yeah. Especially if they caught a bunch of fish on it, just a piece of memorabilia for them.
Exactly. And I always ask if I'm doing a repair, I'm like, hey, is this sentimental or is it just another bait? Like if there's something sentimental about it, I'm not going to mess with it. If I can't repair it, I'll just send you a new bait and your old one back. But if it's not sentimental and they're like, no, I just want a replacement, then here you go. Here's a keychain.
Yeah. Yeah. Free keychain for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we don't always do that. Again, it eats through the saw blades. There's some, internal weighting and stuff, and cutting through those, the screws and all that stuff. You get 3 or 4 heads and your saw blade is done. So if I could find a way, or just sacrifice a couple saw blades and cut through, I've got a tub of probably 300-400 baits that are just junk.
Right. Dang, man.
And probably hundreds more that I've thrown away in the process.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, dude, that was those. We went through all our questions we had. Was there anything that you were excited to talk about that we didn't touch on?
All of it, just going in depth, man. Like, I haven't really got to go super in depth on some of these topics. Some of them I have. I've talked about Spro and how that all came about, to some degree. But some of this stuff, it's the first time I've really got to go in depth about like what got me into fishing. That there's just a lot that it's hard for me to even recap now because I've been just chatterboxing. I've ate up. You probably get 2 or 3 episodes out of this, but just got to really go in depth, and that was really cool. The struggles, the hardships, the employees, stuff like that I've really not got a chance to explain and talk about. The innovation side, the actual manufacturing process. There's a lot that I haven't got to go in depth on that I have wanted to. So no, thank you. There's nothing I can really think of I think we've not left any stones unturned.
Cool, man.
Other than stuff that I couldn't talk about anyways.
Right. So. Yeah. I was about to say the explicit stuff that we weren't able to talk about.
Like, materials or recipes or exactly how we do it. I would not tell anybody that stuff. And you didn't ask. So other than that, no, I think we've covered all bases.
Cool. We'll have to think of some more questions over the course of the next couple weeks and couple months, so we can do it. So you can write for the magazine sometime.
Yeah, techniques. That'll be the next one.
Yeah, that'd be sweet. That'd be awesome.
Yep. When and how and what and all that stuff.
For anybody who, obviously we've said it a couple times, who's been living under a rock, where can they find KGB Swimbaits on Instagram? Is there just KGB Swimbaits and stuff on everything?
Yes, thank you. You did ask that. Where can you get your baits and all that stuff? I didn't get to that. KGB Swimbaits on Facebook and Instagram and the website. And you asked about how we do drops. So we will produce as many baits as we possibly can, send them out to a painter. And we've got 3 different painters that we work with. When we get those baits back, we will put hooks on them, trim the tails if needed. I've got some of the painters who can trim the tails now, so that's great. Pretty much get that bait ready, tune it, press the pin in place, get it in its box, and then we'll put it on the website. Now, they're called drops. I've tried to get away from the drops. I haven't dubbed it that. That's customers have dubbed it that. So now I have to. So we'll put baits on the website, and they sell out very, very quickly. I'm trying to meet demand. We hand make our baits. I got a small team of 5 guys and 3 painters. So, and then a part-time guy who's incredible with what he does. He does most of the tuning. My one part-time guy has one of the most important roles.
Yeah.
But I feel like he needs that break too, because he's single-handedly tuning a bunch of baits. Now I'll step in and help too, and we have others that can.
Yeah.
But so due to our process, we just don't turn out as high of a volume as what the demand is, and so they do sell out very quickly. But yeah, they're all. I'll always announce either on Facebook or Instagram or both. On when baits are available. Sometimes I'll do it shortly after they're on the website, so we don't have the website jamming up with people. We'll always announce when the baits are available at somewhere.
Yeah, so I was gonna tell you, guys are really good about it on Facebook. You give give like an hour and then like a 20-minute heads up, and usually, I mean, if people wanted to, and if they pay attention to the Facebook, they more times than not could probably at least get a chance at a bait 1 out of 2 times, I would think.
Right, and every single time you're going to see somebody on their comment, man, I've been trying for 2 years.
Yeah.
And no, you haven't. Sorry. Right. We've put out in 2 years, if we're putting out, an average of 150 to 200 baits a week, and you've been trying for 2 years and you've missed out, you have some horrible luck.
Yeah, you might have tried once.
And I've even given hey, this tackle store has baits, go get them. And that tackle store have them for 4 or 5 days, 6 days. The baits are not impossible to get. Are they difficult to get? Yes. They're not impossible to get. If you try 3 or 4 times and you're actually trying, you will get a bait. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. I was about to say, you might have tried 2 years, once last year and once this year, but
yeah. And what's funny, you can go back on almost every post, or at least every other one, and you will see that one Joe Blow. He's like, oh, I tried for 2 years. I give up. These are impossible to get. Well, man,
That's funny.
If
Will you,
toilet paper was that hard to get, I'm sure he would get his hands on it.
will you guys be at the Classic?
Uh, we will not. We don't have a booth at the Classic,
Okay.
but I will be with Spro, and we've got. I don't know exactly how many baits. I want to say close to 300 baits that we have reserved for McKee Outdoors, who will be
Okay.
at the Classic.
Cool.
So Spro is going to be again. This is you're the first one to be able to see this bait wherever I've set it right here. It blended in with all the resin
All
ones.
the-
Yeah. Um, so you're the first one to see this, but this is going to be available at and only available in their numbering,
Yep.
1 through
Yep.
5,000
5,000.
at the Classic through Spro. And then McKee Outdoors is going to have a variety of baits
Right.
that I've been holding back and some colors that we've never put on the website. I've been telling painters for the past like 3 months, like, hey, take 20 of these and do what you want.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be some colors that have this is the only place you're going to be able to get them if
Heck
they sell out. Now, if they don't sell out, they'll probably take them.
right. Oh, you would froze for a second. Let's see if it comes back. Maybe. Nope.
It
All right,
cut
there
off.
we are.
Yeah.
We had talked about if there's leftovers of the couple that the painters have been painting, will you guys throw those back on the site, or will McKee take those back and put them at the shop?
I guess that's to be determined. He will probably want them. Like
Right.
he's
Yeah.
been, he right now he's like, dude, I'll take. I asked him how many baits he want. He's like, yeah, that's
Yeah.
his answer.
Yeah.
So
You got
he'll
my
probably take.
address.
Yeah. So and I've sent them a handful of baits already, and they're what's good about them. I have a couple local tackle stores that I work with, but they're way out, and it's like it's good to kind of branch out and not have everything just
Mhm.
here local.
Heck yeah, man.
So
Well, Kevin, that was everything that I had written down to ask you, and we went down quite a few rabbit holes, and we got to hear stories like you said that you don't necessarily get to share. You're not going to make a Facebook post about a story or Instagram post or whatever it may be. So I'm glad that we were able to work out a time for you to come on and kind of just explain how you've gotten to where you are today. I think it's a lot. It's a story that I know a lot of people have wanted to hear. I've couldn't even tell you how many times people said, "Oh, you should get KGB on." I was like, "Oh, believe me, I texted him. We
well,
just got to wait."
and dude, I'm sorry for taking so long, and I'm
No,
sorry for this dragging out so long. I think this is one of the longest ones I've ever done, and
yeah,
part of that is I don't do very many podcasts, and right now, again, I'm kind of down with my knee, so it's
mhm,
like, all right,
yep,
let's do these, let's do it, and let's
absolutely,
do it right.
yep.
So you got a lot of content to cut out, sure.
Heck yeah, man. Yeah, I think people will enjoy it. I think people who know KGB the Instagram and Facebook pages and stuff will be intrigued to hear, especially the newer guys who
Yeah,
don't really remember from 4 years ago senior baits and stuff. The guys that have been getting into it for the last year or 2 years, be able to kind of hear your beginnings and kind of how you've had to cut your teeth to get where you are and hear the Spro story and stuff. I think a lot of guys are really going to enjoy that, and I hope they really enjoyed that. I'm gonna put up a post tomorrow morning and see if guys will listen to a almost 3 hour podcast, if they'd rather me break it up into two parts. So well, they might be hearing this 3 weeks from now rather than 2 weeks. But
yeah.
whenever they do hear it,
20-minute
I think
segments for the next month.
yeah, whenever they do hear it, I think people are gonna really enjoy it. So as always, I'll put all Kevin's stuff in the show notes. You guys can go follow KGB Baits on Instagram, Facebook, and check out the website. Maybe this will line up to when they're doing one of their drops, so you guys can go score bait if you're not already. And if you're going to the Classic, keep your eye out. If you run into Kevin, tell him what you thought about the episode. If you guys enjoyed it, if you were able to bear us for 3 hours at least.
Yeah,
Uh,
sorry.
no, you're good, man.
No, my
Kevin,
whole crew will be there, so that's something I do want to point out. Like, my crew is phenomenal. Like, I
yeah,
can't take all credit.
right,
This is not just me. As far as designing the baits and stuff, yeah, I've done a killer job. The guys are the ones killing it out there,
mhm,
working and actually producing baits. So
yeah.
they're all going to be at the Classic too.
Cool. Cool. What if they've got like if they feel comfortable and they got Instagram and stuff, shoot me over their Instagrams and I'll link all those too if people want to follow them, they
I
can.
don't I actually don't have them. I have made made a big point to keep personal and
Okay.
private, and
Perfect.
yeah, I don't have them.
No, you're
So
good, man. You're good. But like always, Kevin, I want to thank you for coming on. I hope you guys listening enjoyed this episode. Like it was a full episode. You guys got your money's worth today. Hope you guys learned a lot, and maybe go pick up one of those limited Spro colors if you guys have the chance. But as always, I want to thank you guys for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I'll talk to you guys next time. See you guys.